Chapter 771. The awakened girl was surrounded by the girls, led by Euphemia, in the middle of the garden. Looking from afar, it was a scene of laughter. But standing at the edge of the garden and watching this beautiful scene, Ray Minkai did not dare to step forward and participate in this beautiful scene of sisters reuniting after a long separation. There was no other reason. It was because the girls around Nunnally v. Britannia, who had just awakened but was unexpectedly able to move around outside, made Ray Minkai flinch. Why don't you go up and have a chat? Just as Ray Minkai was hesitating, State Zero's teasing voice rang in Ray Minkai's ears as usual. Time really flies. Unknowingly, so many princesses have gathered around you. Yep, there were 3 princesses with the same pink hair. TSK, TSK, TSK. White Cat State Zero's figure appeared on Ray Minkai's shoulder. At the same time, it gestured with its claws and counted the princesses who were close to Ray Minkai. Shut up, State Zero. If you don't speak, no one will treat you as a mute. The corner of Ray Minkai's eyes twitched, and he raised his hand to pat White Cat State Zero's little head. Being hit on the head, White Cat State Zero grinned, revealing its sharp teeth, and growled a few times at Ray Minkai. This is the truth. Kai, do you know what the group of women who can transform into space battleships said about you? Recently, relying on its cute little white cat appearance, White Cat State Zero had gained a lot of popularity among the blue ship girls. Based on this reason, White Cat State Zero also learned about Ray Minkai's evaluation from there. Evaluation? Ray Minkai's heart faintly had a trace of a bad feeling. Yes, White Cat State Zero's mouth curled up slightly, revealing its white teeth. You know, this is a very good, very subtle evaluation. Why do I feel that this is not the evaluation that a normal person would want? Ray Minkai's intuition gave him a very bad feeling. If not for the White Cat State Zero lying firmly on Ray Minkai's shoulder, Ray Minkai would have thrown the White Cat State Zero into a corner to shut it up. In the end, Ray Minkai, who did not do so, welcomed the evaluation that followed him for a lifetime. White Cat State Zero's eyes curved slightly, like a child who succeeded in a prank, and said in a cheerful voice, Kai, those women call you Princess Lover, and as long as you meet a princess, none of them will be able to escape from your grasp. What? Ahem. Ahem. Caught off guard, Ray Minkai finally understood what that ominous feeling meant. Princess Lover, the title that was given to her by the ship's women turned out to be, was actually such a coincidence. The name that was similar to the famous little butter in his memory was actually placed on his head in the form of a title. Under the agitation, his lungs that could not regulate his breathing were frantically agitated, causing Ray Minkai to cough repeatedly. Even Euphemia, Lilina, and the others who were talking heard Ray Minkai's coughing. In order not to be discovered by Euphemia and the other girls, Ray Minkai endured the discomfort caused by his noisy lungs and quickly left the garden. He ran all the way to the river before gradually calming down. State Zero, tell me honestly, was this your bad idea? Trying hard to calm his noisy lungs, Ray Minkai reached out and grabbed the White Cat State Zero from his shoulder and asked fiercely. State Zero, who was extremely fierce in battle, was actually very obedient at this moment. His limbs drooped down, those slightly bent airplane ears, those delicate and pitiful eyes, just like a weak and powerless kitten. But Ray Minkai did not fall for the White Cat State Zero's trick. Others might not know, but as his partner, Ray Minkai knew that this guy was definitely faking it, in order to get away with it. This was a tactic that State Zero had used to perfection. Otherwise, how could it have a certain degree of popularity in the First Fleet that was dominated by women? It really wasn't me who said it. White Cat State Zero innocently raised its small paw, indicating that it did not do anything to betray Ray Minkai. Really, Ray Minkai really did not dare to fully believe State Zero. Do you dare to bet with Warehouse Number 1? After verifying, Ray Minkai's words hit State Zero's weak spot. One must know that Warehouse Number 1 was a food warehouse specially set up by the Britannia Empire under the orders of Euphemia for State Zero. In addition to the superior cherry stones that were specially provided for State Zero, There were also other rare minerals that were used as snacks. A warehouse filled with such delicacies was undoubtedly the existence of a reverse scale for State Zero. Upon hearing this bet, White Cat State Zero's expression suddenly became very interesting. But in the end, White Cat State Zero still gritted its teeth. I'll bet. It really wasn't me who said it. In the park, suspicious gazes were wandering around. It seemed that they were looking for someone who suddenly appeared and disappeared in an instant. Euphemia, what's wrong? While reuniting with Euphemia after a long separation, Lilina also got to know Euphemia's companions, Vervian, Isolem, Teresa, and the others. Lilina was very happy, but she was also very puzzled by Euphemia's sudden movement of looking around. No, I just feel like someone is looking over here. Euphemia shook her head and did not confess her thoughts. However, Vervian, who was sitting on the right of Lilina, had already seen through Euphemia's thoughts, but she did not point it out. Instead, she redirected the topic back to the original focus. Right. Didn't Lilina just say that when you were young, you argued about who could be the bride of Lilina's brother, the person called Lucio? What was the result? Leaving aside Lilina's reaction, Euphemia immediately retorted, "Don't worry about that. Vervian, that was just a joke when we were young." Joke? In a hurry, Euphemia subconsciously refuted and did not consider Lilina's thoughts. Upon seeing Nunnally's familiar face filled with disappointment, Euphemia hurriedly explained, "That's right. No, Lilina, I didn't mean it that way. I still remember that at that time, we still had to decide who would be the bride tonight, and it was a very difficult situation for Lucio." Euphemia's memories seemed to have worked. The disappointment on Lilina's face gradually disappeared. However, Lilina's next sentence made Euphemia feel awkward. What about now? If Euphemia still remembers the situation at that time, is the current Euphemia still? Although Lilina's question was not finished, all the girls, including Euphemia, knew the content of the question. At this moment, in addition to Euphemia, Lilina, who was the one who asked the question, as well as the bystanders, Iselin, Teresa, and Vervian, were all waiting for the answer. An answer that everyone knew, but they were waiting for Euphemia to say it herself. Euphemia's mouth moved, but she did not say anything to answer the question. Instead, she tried to divert Lilina's attention. "Lilina, it's great that you can wake up and come back. Why don't we prepare to go home?" Unexpectedly, Lilina stretched out her hand and grabbed Euphemia's right hand. An unprecedented determination appeared on that tender little face. "Sister Euphemia, please tell me, does the current Euphemia v. Britannia still have feelings for brother?" "Sister?" Euphemia was stunned by Lilina's address. Ever since she met Lilina when she was young, Lilina seemed to have never used this address to call her. "Lilina, why?" The answer was already known from the beginning. However, Euphemia remembered the feelings she had with Lilina since they were young, and did not want to destroy the beautiful moment when they met again after a long time. "Because I want to know when brother and I were in trouble, Euphemia." Lilina suddenly shook her head, closed her eyes, and fell silent. Looking at Lilina's hesitant look, Euphemia frowned slightly. However, she did not urge Lilina, and quietly waited for Lilina to speak. The evening breeze blew away the heat of the day, and it also rolled up the petals of the flowers in the garden. Among the fluttering petals, a few petals were sent to Lilina's hands. Looking at the petals in her hands, Lilina said faintly, "I want to know if Euphemia, the current ruler of the Britannia Empire and the ruler of the world in the name of the Empress, will save brother and I when we are in trouble." After saying that, Lilina suddenly raised her head and looked directly into Euphemia's eyes, as if she wanted to see through Euphemia's heart. This was a question that had to be answered. Euphemia was very clear and also very clear about how she should answer this question. However, that was only the answer she would give as the Empress of the Britannia Empire. Euphemia did not want to face Lilina with the mask of the Empress. "Lilina," Euphemia softly called the name of her half-sister. "I don't want to deceive you. That's right. At that time, I did like Lucio very much like you. I even quarreled with you over the question of who can become Lou Lucio's New Year's bride. A trace of nostalgia appeared in Euphemia's eyes. There was a trace of nostalgia for the beautiful memories of the past. But now we have grown up. Lilina, when you suffered misfortune, I was also in a life and death situation, and I also wandered alone in front of hell. At that time, there was always a person standing by my side, supporting me, encouraging me, and accompanying me until I defeated the Grim Reaper. And with me, we saw the vastness of this world and the mysteries hidden in the deep void. Lilina, the me who quarreled with you over the question of who can become Lou Lucio's New Year's bride, has become a scene in the beautiful memories of the past. Of course, this is not the current me denying the feelings between you and me. It's just that, Lilina, the person who can stand by Lou Lucio's side is not me, and there is no place for Lou Lucio by my side. From the moment I woke up in the City of Stars, I knew that there was only one person by my side. That is my knight, Ray Minkai. Chapter 772. Now, as the interim chairman of the United Unified Body, I announce that the first motion regarding the establishment of the United Unified Body has been unanimously approved by all the representatives present. After a month of negotiations, the Constitution and Constitution of the highest human alliance had finally been finalized. Amidst the thunderous applause, Carta, who participated in this conference as the head of the Yethu family, found that a seat not far away was empty. Kalta subconsciously looked left and right, and indeed he caught sight of two figures standing in the corner of the venue, talking. After pondering for a moment, Carta gestured to his followers and left his seat. Under the cover of the applauding crowd, he walked all the way to the corner. This was probably the only time that Carta could move around freely. After the announcement of the first motion, it was time for Lars Horn, the representative of the Barwin family, to give a speech on stage. When the speech ended, as one of the representatives of Lars Horn, Carta would inevitably be surrounded by a swarm of people trying to build a good relationship with Carta. This was an inevitable result. Even though Lars Horn had been disbanded, the soldiers under his command had been transferred to the United Unified Body. The number of soldiers in the army was 2/3 of the original number of Lars Horn. In other words, other than the few families that had suffered heavy losses during the revival of the ancient ritual, the remaining 3 7-star families, Barwin, Yethu, and Farid, had firmly controlled 2/3 of the power in their hands. In a sense, the disbandment of Lars Horn was just a change of clothes and a change of name for these 3 families. They were not affected by the disbandment of Lars Horn at all. Carta passed through the crowd and rejected the many representatives who wanted to join in the fun. Soon, he arrived at the corner. "Why aren't you guys sitting in your seats? What are you doing here?" The 2 people hiding in the corner were Ray Minkai and Galio, who were whispering to each other. They were unanimously not interested in this conference. After the vote at the beginning, they found an excuse to leave. They did not expect Carta to come all the way here. "Yo, Carta, you also think this conference is a bit boring?" Galio, on the other hand, waved at Kalta as a greeting. "Bored? This is about our future development. Galio, even if Uncle is supporting you from the front, you still know your duty." Unexpectedly, Carta's face stiffened when he heard Galio's greeting, and he lectured him. It made Galio's eyes twitch, but there was nothing he could do. "Kalta, we were just talking about McGillis's whereabouts. It's not idle chatter." Fortunately, Ray Minkai came to Galio's rescue. "McGillis? Didn't he go looking for Amelia? Even the Farid clan was handed over to you." Kalta frowned. "Right now, what you need to do is to guide the unification of this world. Only then will you have the confidence to face the world, even if that's just an insignificant confidence." That's right. The universe was vast. Humanity might have reached the pinnacle of history after completing the unification, but compared to the vast universe of time and space, it was nothing more than a fleeting radiance. In the vast space, the huge fleet finally came to the time to bid farewell to this world. Hearing the reluctance in Tsang Land's mental network, King Kong's eyes moved and looked at Mimi standing next to him. Are you disappointed? Mimi, after such a big move, there were no results as expected. Mimi must be very disappointed, right? No. Although the result isn't the best, at least I know that Anai is still alive. After the initial depression, Mimi's fighting spirit seemed to have been ignited again. Is that so? But Mimi, do you know what it means for someone who should have died, who should no longer exist in this universe to reappear? I know. I understand. In that past, Mimi not only witnessed Anai's death with her own eyes, but she was also powerless to do anything about it. After that, Mimi also thought of using the power of the superdimensional fortress to resurrect her dead best friend, but in the end, she failed again and again. The only reason why someone can appear again after being determined as dead by the universe is probably the abyss. Am I right? Mother King Kong. Mimi's eyes flickered with some brilliance. It was called the brilliance of persistence. In this regard, King Kong neither objected nor agreed. She just nodded faintly. Yes, only the abyss can preserve an individual who has been determined to be dead. That group of people called the Destiny Council probably wants to use her, your best friend, to achieve some unspeakable secrets. Then, why don't we just smash this messy parliament before those secrets are exposed? Mimi snorted, raised her right hand, and clenched it hard. With a clanging sound, a steel glove with golden brilliance wrapped Mimi's flawless white wrist. If the Destiny Council can be smashed with one punch, I'm afraid your father wouldn't have been entangled with it for so many years. Mimi's confidence was a good thing. But in fact, since the Destiny Council entered the Pioneer's site, there had been no less than 100 big and small battles with them. Even if the Pioneers were able to emerge victorious in every battle, the mastermind behind the scenes would always be able to escape from the Pioneers' line of sight. According to the Pioneers' evaluation of the Destiny Council, this organization's attack power might not be too strong, but its attainment in escaping was absolutely the best in the universe. Mimi obviously knew this, but she was unwilling to admit defeat. However, King Kong changed the topic and said something that Mimi was quite concerned about. Although that's what you said, from the previous battle videos and the records of previous battles with the Destiny Council, the other party seems to have prepared something, or perhaps they have a means to achieve their true goal of hiding in the shadows. Mother King Kong, are you saying that the so-called Destiny Council is about to surface? Maybe and maybe not. King Kong did not say too much, but as she spoke, she looked at a battleship on the flank of the fleet. The person on that ship may be the opportunity for the situation to become clear. Chapter 773. In front of the huge palace gate, there were soldiers wearing the Empire's military uniform with solemn expressions. Under the watchful eyes of these soldiers, well-dressed men and women, some fat, some handsome, some delicate, and some gorgeous, arrived in groups of 2s and 3s from various parts of the Empire to this gate that led into the depths of the Imperial Palace. What was different from the past year's court meetings was that the nobles, big and small, who used to be calculating and scheming in their words, were all silent. Even if there was some conversation, it was only after a few hurried exchanges, and they continued to look at the palace gate that hadn't been open for a long time. The light of dawn that dispelled the darkness gradually rose, and the nobles who were waiting in front of the palace gate for the summons from the palace were sweating profusely. It must be known that it was currently summer. Even if the morning was relatively cool, it made it difficult for these nobles who used to live like princes to resist the gradually rising heat. Is Her Majesty back? In the middle of the crowd, 2 middle-aged men in luxurious clothes were talking softly. Yes, if the news from the palace is correct, Our Majesty, who often runs away from home, should be back. The middle-aged man with a sky-blue scarf on his neck nodded slightly. As he spoke, he cautiously glanced at the tightly shut palace door. Otherwise, why would she go through so much trouble to summon all of us here? The man with a goatee and mono-rimmed glasses next to him frowned, seeming to be somewhat puzzled. Even if Her Majesty is back, there's no need to summon all of us here, right? You must know, the last court meeting was only a few days ago. Could it be that Her Majesty doesn't trust her sister? Hee hee. Then I don't know. Perhaps we'll know the reason later. Silence. At this moment, above the palace gate, the moment a vigorous and loud royal attendant appeared. He loudly announced the summons that these nobles had been waiting for. The 100th Empress of the Britannia Empire, Euphemia L. Britannia summons all officials. Open the gates. The moment they stepped through the palace gates, a gust of cold air hit them in the face, dispersing the increasingly torturous heat wave. Some people also noticed that behind the palace gates, there was a slight change on the two sides of the path that led to the emperor's audience with the officials. A huge figure, gold and silver intertwined to form a magnificent armor. Ritual swords that were several meters long were stabbed into the ground by pairs of giant steel hands. The sunlight reflected off the sharp blade made the hearts of the nobles who were walking along the path to the audience jump. Those with weaker mental fortitude even subconsciously picked up the silk handkerchief with trembling hands and wiped the cold sweat on their foreheads over and over again. Their feet were even faster as they walked towards the audience. Imperial Personal Knight Regiment. Those gigantic figures were the Empire's current, or rather, only the Empire's Personal Knight Regiment was qualified to use the new Mecha, the Lionheart Knight. It seemed to have been a long time since the last time the Lionheart Knight appeared in front of the world, especially after the commander of the Imperial Personal Knight Regiment, the future Prince Rei Minkai, temporarily left the Empire. This Imperial Personal Knight Regiment that guarded the safety of the Imperial Palace and the Empress became even more low-key. Now, when Her Majesty, who ran away from home, returned, this low-key but lofty Imperial Personal Knight Regiment appeared in front of the nobles in such a dazzling way. Not many people would believe that there wasn't something hidden in this place. There were even some quick-witted people who quickly recalled the imperial court meeting where the three great aristocratic families had joined forces to force the young empress to submit to them. At that time, there seemed to be a similar atmosphere. The man with the sky-blue scarf turned his head slightly and looked at the Lionheart Knight on both sides of the road. The reason for such a big movement was probably that the person who caused Her Majesty to frequently run away from home had returned, right? The answer to this question was quickly answered. Not long after, when the nobles who walked through the road guarded by the Empire's new mech, the Lionheart Knight, finally found their place in the audience, a familiar figure also appeared on the side of the throne. Her cloak, which was white on the outside and light purple on the inside, fluttered gently with each step she took. Her pink hair was tied up high, making her look exceptionally neat and tidy. It also allowed her eyes, which flickered with a stern gaze, to clearly see the many nobles standing under the throne. Silence, Cornelia shouted sternly, attracting everyone's attention to her. As the Prime Minister, when Euphemia left the Empire, Cornelia, who was in charge of the Empire, had experienced the same situation many times in the past year. But this time it was different, because from today onwards, the burden on her shoulders could finally be lifted a little. A certain sister who ran away from home had finally returned. Welcome Her Majesty Euphemia L. Britannia, the 100th Empress of the Britannia Empire. The nobles knelt down and bowed respectfully, waiting for the appearance of Her Majesty, the Empress of the Empire. On the throne, there was a sound of footsteps. She wore a white royal robe. On her head was a golden crown inlaid with bright gems. The young empress, holding a scepter that symbolized the supreme power of the empire, slowly walked out from the side, surrounded by 4 maids, and ascended to the throne, looking down at the many nobles kneeling below. Everyone rise. Euphemia and Cornelia looked at each other and raised their hands. Immediately after the nobles got up, Euphemia did not open with too many pleasantries, but chose to go straight to the point. She knew very well that during the time she chose to run away from home, from the throne in order to find Rei Minkai, not only did it put pressure on her sister Cornelia, but it also made many ministers dissatisfied. Everyone, I believe that you are dissatisfied with the things that happened some time ago. This is inevitable. However, if those things were to happen again, I would make the same decision. Because this is the most important person in my life. Who would have thought that the young empress's opening speech would be like this? This made the ministers who wanted to criticize or look at each other, not knowing what to say for a while. Originally, due to the many effects brought about by Euphemia's running away from home, the ministers thought that they could catch Euphemia's mistake, but they did not expect Euphemia to be one step ahead and admit all the mistakes. Cornelia, announce it. Euphemia knew that she could not give the opponent any time to react, so she secretly hinted to Cornelia. Cornelia, who had a deep sisterly relationship, immediately threw out a rather important piece of news. The seventh princess of the Holy Britannia Empire, Natalie V. Britannia, is summoned. The prince of the Holy Britannia Empire, Mecha, is summoned. The two names, one after the other, made all the nobles present fall into an uproar. Not to mention the latter. The name of the former was both familiar and unfamiliar to the nobles. Not long ago, the chaos that brought the Britannia Empire to the brink of destruction was caused by a man named Lucio V. Britannia. Nunnally versus Britannia. Those who knew the members of the Britannia royal family from many years ago would not find it difficult to remember these two names related to the famous Princess Mariana, who died young. The former had long disappeared after the chaos, and the latter was silent. At most, after the chaos, when Euphemia personally ordered the dispatch of people, she became one of the topics of conversation at the dinner table. But at this moment, Euphemia actually found this member of the royal family who was supposed to have disappeared and could only be used as a topic of conversation? No, it shouldn't be like this. The quick-witted nobles quietly shifted their gaze to the man who pushed the wheelchair into the audience. It wasn't Euphemia who had found the missing seventh princess, Nunnally V. Britannia. It should be this young man who was a knight commander and a prince of the empire. Under this consensus, a considerable number of nobles quickly exchanged glances and then remained silent, quietly watching the subsequent development. In the wheelchair, a girl wearing a pink dress with purple pupils, faintly uneasy slowly, stirred her small hands covered by her sleeves to offset the uneasiness in her heart. After experiencing so many changes, even if the name Britannia was part of the name, this huge palace and the well-dressed crowd were just completely unfamiliar existences to Natalie. Don't worry, everyone is just surprised. Natalie, Mecha, who firmly held the wheelchair with both hands and pushed the wheelchair at a constant speed, softly comforted the somewhat uneasy little figure in the wheelchair. Is that so? Natalie's eyes moved slowly, carefully, and cautiously looking at the crowd on both sides. Perhaps, when she was a child, before her mother Mariana died, Natalie had experienced a similar scene. But now, Natalie couldn't remember any related memories. The only thing left was the unfamiliar crowd and the surrounding gazes that made her somewhat uneasy. Yes, trust me. While Mecha comforted Nunnally softly, he also turned to look at the high and mighty throne and nodded slightly at Euphemia, who was looking at him. Everyone, let's cheer loudly. Our empire's seventh princess, Natalie V. Britannia, who was wandering among the commoners, has returned to the empire with the efforts of Imperial Prince Mecha. Chapter 774. The court meeting between the audience was still going on, but in the back of the palace there was a lot of noise. The moment the clean and tidy maids with elegant postures placed the exquisite food on the table, they also attracted the attention of the youths sitting next to them. The fragrant aroma of the food that made people's mouths water, made the lowly youths make a fuss about nothing and exclaim repeatedly. The commotion they caused even Olga, who had been trying his best to put on a mature appearance since he entered the imperial palace, collapsed in an instant. Hey, Eugene, Sino, why don't you take care of your team members? Making so much noise, what a scandal. Although Olga's skin leaned towards dark, one could still see that Olga's face was a little red because of the noise made by his young subordinates. Fortunately, the maids in charge of serving them were strictly trained palace maids and would not be swayed by the noise made by the guests. After secretly looking at the maids who were standing at the side and serving them food and drinks at any time, Olga weakly patted his head and completely lost the idea of stopping the youths from making noise and even fighting over the food. If only everyone was like you, it would be good. 3 suns and moons. Olga was just about to praise 3 suns and moons, who had been quietly eating beside her, when she noticed that there was a small mountain of delicately packaged chocolates next to the silent 3 suns and moons, who had been eating without saying a word. The corner of Olga's eyes twitched rapidly, and he almost did not react. Your Excellency, Olga, this is a gift that His Highness the Prince personally ordered to be given to Your Excellency 3 suns and moons. Please rest assured, this is the chocolate specially supplied by the Imperial Household Treasury. Seeing Olga's confusion, the maid standing at the side hurriedly went up and explained. The reason why these maids could calmly watch the youths led by Olga making a scene here was because of their professionalism, but more importantly, it was because of Rei Minkai's precaution in advance. The ones who returned to the Gia's world were not only Rei Minkai, Euphemia, and the others, but also the Ironflower Regiment led by Olga and Gudelia, who followed Avalon to the Gia's world in the name of a friendly visit to the unified entity of the Human Supreme Alliance. Gudelia participated in the ongoing court meeting as a diplomat, while Olga and the others were called to the back of the palace by Rei Minkai. They were greeted with delicious food and drinks, lest these youths, who were dazzled by the space-time travel and other new and exciting things to them, run around everywhere. Cough. Go. Dear. Just as he was about to ask about Rei Minkai's whereabouts, Olga suddenly realized that he didn't know how to address Rei Minkai. Olga originally thought that Rei Minkai was just a businessman who invested in the Ironflower Regiment, but he didn't expect Rei Minkai to transform into the prince of a huge empire. In Olga's eyes, the empress of the empire wasn't Lakis Klein, who was very close to Rei Minkai. Instead, it was someone else. His Highness, the prince has instructed that Your Excellency Olga can address him as Your Highness like before. The maid seemed to have expected Olga's reaction, so before Olga could figure it out, she took the initiative to help Olga out of the predicament. Of course, the maids only dared to do so after Rei Minkai personally instructed them to do so. All right then. Thank you very much. Looking at the beautiful maid of the royal family, Olga couldn't help but blush and become a little reserved. Then cough. May I ask if His Highness is still in the court? The maid smiled slightly, charming and charming. Yes, His Highness the Prince has instructed that before he returns, we must try our best to satisfy the requests of the distinguished guests. As soon as the sentence came out, before Olga could react, Sino, who was about to eat and drink to his heart's content, shouted on the spot. Really? The next second, Olga subconsciously slapped Sino and scolded him. Sino, go and eat your food. As for why he did this, Olga didn't know, but he faintly felt that if he let Sino continue on this topic, something uncontrollable would definitely happen. Sino, go lie down after you're full. Eugene, who was holding a plate full of steaks with shining eyes, pointed at Sino and teased him. TSK, go away. Poor guy who has never experienced the beauty of a woman. Sino snorted, but didn't dare to continue on this topic. You better stop before you go too far. You guys. Olga sighed helplessly. Ever since he sat in this luxurious palace, surrounded by beautiful maids, and had delicious food in front of him, Olga felt uneasy. When will that court meeting end? In fact, the court meeting didn't last very long. Other than announcing Lena's return to the nobles and the courtiers, there was only the diplomatic team, led by Gudelia, to have an audience. The former surprised the nobles, but the latter was already a common occurrence. Ever since Euphemia made Teresa from the all-metal world, Inafan and her brother from the AZ world, and Asorium nobles, the courtiers knew that this day would come. How do you feel? After the court meeting ended, when only Rei Minkai and the others were left, Rei Minkai looked at Gudelia, who was still somewhat reserved, and asked. Gudelia froze for a moment, then looked at Euphemia, who had handed the scepter to a maid, and smiled bitterly. Even now, I still feel that it's a bit unreal. Do you think Kai is lying to you? Euphemia, who walked down from the throne, smiled and introduced herself again. I'm Euphemia L. Britannia, and this is my sister Cornelia L. Britannia. Then Euphemia said, "That's right. This is a private conversation. You don't have to be so formal about my identity. I believe that when you talked to Kai before, you didn't care about his identity, right?" Hearing this, Gudelia smiled bitterly. "At that time, we didn't even know that you were a prince of the Empire. Ahem, that was just an accident. But thanks to that, we were able to find Lilina." Ray Minkai saw that the situation was not good, so he immediately changed the topic to Lilina. He knew that as long as the topic slightly extended to the Predator world, it would inevitably extend to Lux, who was in urgent need to deal with matters and return to Starlight City with Himimi, but could not come to the Gias world with him. When that time came, it would probably be a disaster. "Lilina, are you tired?" Cornelia looked at her half-sister, who was sitting in a wheelchair and looking at them quietly, and asked softly. "No, it's fine. It's just that it's a bit unfamiliar. Don't worry. This is your home. Let bygones be bygones. No one will hurt you here anymore." The gentleness that Cornelia displayed at this moment was very rare. Most of the time, it would only appear in front of Euphemia. Perhaps she had already acknowledged this sister of hers, who was plagued with misfortune from the bottom of her heart. "All right, I'm afraid Lilina and Gudelia are tired. Why don't we go to the back of the palace and get something to eat?" Euphemia glanced at the door discreetly, and then invited Gudelia and Nunnally to come in. Naturally, the two women readily agreed. However, Ray Minkai stood in place and watched the girls leave. There was no other reason. It was because someone had been waiting at the door for a long time. The silver-gray oblique ponytail was still beautiful. The graceful figure outlined by the Empire's military uniform was still moving. The pair of eyes that were constantly watching Ray Minkai were still as bright as ever. Adjutant Veretta was standing quietly at the door, waiting for Ray Minkai to appear. "Your Highness, welcome back." There was a trace of excitement in Veretta's strict voice. I'm back. Veretta, you've worked hard during this period of time." Ray Minkai seemed to have noticed that Veretta had lost some weight. However, Veretta didn't give Ray Minkai a chance to ask. She immediately handed over the documents in her arms. "Your Highness, these are the important documents that the Night Order has accumulated. Please deal with them immediately. There are a few documents that need to be approved by 16 p.m. Veretta's expression became stern, and the fluctuation in her voice disappeared without a trace. Only the voice that couldn't be refused was left. This might be the strict adjutant's work requirement for her superior. However, Ray Minkai unexpectedly smelled a trace of something wrong. Especially when he thought of Euphemia's secret glance at him just now, the strangeness in Ray Minkai's heart became more and more intense. He didn't say much. He didn't ask. Ray Minkai stepped forward and returned to his office accompanied by Veretta. Immediately, the figure of the White Cat State Zero emerged from the void. After looking around the layout of the office, it quickly went to a corner and slapped a few small things hidden in the corner on the table. "I haven't been back for a while, and someone actually put these little things in. Woman, you've neglected your duty." Veretta was stunned. Her face was very ugly, but she didn't want to deny or even defend herself. "Relax, Veretta." Ray Minkai waved his hand and signaled Veretta to calm down. After that, he looked at the White Cat State Zero. The White Cat State Zero looked out of the window and fiddled with the small things that it pulled out in boredom. After that, Ray Minkai once again made a downward gesture to Veretta, signaling Veretta to relax and not be nervous. After that, he began to flip through the documents in his hands. Opening the title page, what came into view was the list of the reserve members of the Imperial Guard Night Order. At the same time, it was also the name of the list that Veretta said had to be approved by 16 p.m. At first glance, there wasn't much problem with the list of reserve members. However, when Ray Minkai reviewed it again, he found a clue. Chapter 775. Under the fluttering banners, there were guards who were in high spirits and were dressed neatly. Today was the day of the Royal Guard Night Regiment's reserve selection. Originally, according to past practice, The reserve selection should be held on the third weekend after the beginning of spring. However, due to the previous reserve selection, the Imperial Knight Captain was out on a mission for some reason, so it had to be delayed until the Imperial Knight Captain returned. Actually, you don't need to care if I can attend the reserve selection. Ray Minkai sighed helplessly as he walked to the aisle leading to the venue and nodded at the guards saluting on both sides. To be honest, the Royal Guard Knight Regiment staff, led by Veretta, seemed to be very concerned about whether Ray Minkai could attend the reserve selection. No, Your Highness. If this was any other time, we would have made arrangements. However, this selection is very important for the Royal Guard Knight Regiment. Veretta, who was half a step behind Ray Minkai, spoke with a serious expression on her face, as well as the thoughts of the entire staff. Is it because this is the first public selection of the Royal Guard Knight Regiment? In fact, the selection of the Royal Guard Knight Regiment had been held at least 3 times. However, the first 3 selections were conducted by the staff, led by Veretta. The qualified personnel were transferred to an unknown valley deep in the Empire's territory, allowing Kiligu, Fianna, and Titania to conduct further training. There were no major problems with this process. Even if there were some casualties under Kiligu and the other two's training, it was still within an acceptable range. Moreover, with the support of the powerful medical technology provided by the City of Starlight, the number of deaths during the training had always been above 1. Now that he thought about it, it might have been an unfortunate thing. Due to an operational error, the reserve member was blown back to the atomic state on the spot. Recalling some details in the report, Ray Minkai could not help but sigh. Yes, the first 3 closed selections have already enriched the core team of the Royal Guard Knight Regiment. Next, it's time to expand the selections. Hearing Ray Minkai's sigh, Veretta knew what Ray Minkai was thinking at the moment. So, there's an opportunity? While talking, the two had already reached the end of the road and stood in front of the gate of the selection venue. Veretta looked up at the gate guarded by the Knight Regiment's Knight Regiment and nodded slightly. Yes, that's why there's such an opportunity. Ray Minkai looked at the knight who saluted him, nodded slightly, and smiled. Then, let's not make them wait. The busy maintenance team was circling around the mech that was about to participate in the reserve duty tryouts. With less than half an hour left, these training-type Lionheart Knights, who were going to be used in the reserve selection competition, quickly appeared in front of Lei Minkai and many other senior members of the Knights. At that time, the training-type Lionheart Knight training-type Knight would become the focus of attention of the higher-ups. The winner of the selection would be promoted to an official member of the Royal Guard Knight Regiment. However, even if the outstanding reserve members failed in the selection, they might still be selected by the higher-ups of the Knight Regiment and be transferred to the next reserve location to receive a new round of training, and then become an official member of the Knight Regiment. Of course, the former was a fixed result under the victory rule, while the latter was more of a private rumor among the reserve members. As for how much truth there was in the rumor, the reserve members who spread the rumor did not have much hope. Compared to pinning their hopes on the slim rumor after failure, the reserve members believed in their own strength more. As time went by, the reserve members who were waiting for the selection to begin also took action. It was very likely that they would focus their minds, adjust their physical condition, and reach the highest level enough to win. They or sat quietly to rest, or held the hilt of the sword, sometimes clenching and sometimes loosening or adjusting their breathing, try to concentrate their physical strength. Among these people, there was a figure who seemed to be somewhat out of place. The reserve members around him were using the methods they were familiar with to concentrate their minds and adjust their physical functions, but he was casually sitting on the bench, holding a water bottle in his hand, and looking at the actions of the reserve members around him in boredom. Why are you working so hard? You are clearly going to be eliminated? Under the short brown hair was a pair of purple eyes that looked indifferently at everything in front of him. Hey, Rollo, I really envy you. You will definitely be able to become a member of the Royal Guard Knight Regiment. Just as the figure was looking at the actions of the people around him in boredom, a somewhat rough voice was heard. However, the moment the voice sounded, that pair of indifferent purple eyes suddenly lit up with a ray of light. In the next moment, A big hand magically slapped down from his side, directly hitting the bench. Bang! The moment the palm that missed hit the cold bench, a muffled sound was heard that attracted everyone's attention. The initiator was stunned, looked at the figure who should not be sitting on the left side of the bench, and then laughed. As expected of Rollo, the Rollo who can always avoid all the attacks when we are unaware. The loud laughter caused by the rough voice made the young man, known as Rollo, frown. Ginnicky. If I were you, I wouldn't waste my time on these things. Now, there are less than 5 minutes before the start of the qualifiers. What? Everyone, including the owner of the rough voice, exclaimed and subconsciously looked at the clock on the wall. Oh no, not good. Quick, get out and line up. The qualifiers are about to start. After a chaotic noise, only the youth called Rollo was left in the restroom. He raised his head and glanced at the clock on the wall, but did not get up and leave with the others. It wasn't until the hour hand made another round that a voice faintly sounded in the room where Lolo was the only one left. It was a slightly sharp male voice. Rollo, why don't you go out? The youth did not answer, and only picked up the bottle of water and slowly drank a mouthful, then put down the bottle and said, Boring. This is just a farce. There's no meaning to it. Meaning? No meaning. Unexpectedly, the youth's words aroused the anger of the sharp voice hidden at the side. Shut up. But before the sharp voice could scold Rollo, the figure hidden in the shadows suddenly froze. It was as if time had stopped, and he did not notice that Rollo, who should have been scolded and obediently stayed in the same place, had already left the room. Only until the moment the door closed did the frozen body and the paused thoughts start moving again. Rollo, you. The moment the angry voice sounded, it stopped abruptly. Then, the sharp voice cursed with hatred. That damned Rollo. Why is he able to receive such a favor? The scorching sun was high in the sky. The banners were fluttering, and the sound of the bugle horn resounded through the sky. One by one, the energized reserve members wearing driving suits stood in front of the stage, accepting the inspection of the high-ranking members of the Night Order, including Ray Minkai. And there seems to be one person missing over there. Ray Minkai, who was sitting on the stage, saw that there seemed to be a small gap at the edge of the square formation with his sharp eyes. Veretta, who was standing beside him, immediately made a gesture, and a subordinate quickly walked up. Your Highness, sir, please give the order. Whose position is over there? Why hasn't he appeared yet? Veretta pointed at the gap and asked reproachfully. That, when the subordinate saw the gap, his expression instantly became interesting. At first, it was astonishment, followed by a burst of anger, and finally, a look of helplessness. That wonderful change in expression piqued Lei Minkai's interest in the person who had caused the gap to appear in the phalanx, but had yet to appear. There is no need to panic. You just need to tell me who that person is. I have no intention of pursuing the responsibility of any of you. Of course, before understanding the situation, Ray Minkai still had to reassure his subordinate. Yes, thank you very much, Your Highness. That is the position of the reserve knight, Rollo. After receiving Lei Minkai's promise, the subordinate who was greatly relieved hurriedly told him the truth. Rollo? The familiar name made Ray Minkai come to a realization. Is that so? You can go down and prepare to begin. This is just a small matter. Yes, Your Highness. Looking at the panicked figure of her subordinate, Veretta frowned, seemingly puzzled. Your Highness, are you not going to pursue the responsibility of that reserve member? Someone was actually late at such an important event. Late? Ray Minkai smiled without a care, and then signaled Veretta to look at the other side of the venue. Look, isn't that the person who arrived? There is still 1 minute left before the start. Strictly speaking, this can't be defined as being late. Rollo, the young man with short brown hair and a pair of purple eyes that looked indifferently at everything in the world, was slowly walking into the venue. He did not care about the gazes around him, nor did he care about the scolding of the Night Order members who acted as the leader. He walked into the venue at his own pace and stood in his own position. Then, He raised his head and looked at the high platform where many higher-ups of the Night Order were watching the ceremony. He saw the man beside the female vice commander with a graceful figure on the high platform. He was his mission target. Chapter 776. The steel giants wielding the knight's spears drove the high-speed pulleys under their feet and sped across the practice field that was the size of several football fields at an extremely high speed. As the dust flew, the steel giants with the same appearance but different colors on their right shoulders either stabbed the knight's spears in their hands or waved their fists to attack the enemy that had already been locked on. Bang! When the long knight's spears collided, the roar of the explosion swept through the practice field like a storm, and the audience watching the battle nodded their heads repeatedly. Listening to the discussion around her, Veretta turned her head slightly and looked at Ray Minkai, who was sitting on the main seat. "Your Highness." Ray Minkai heard the voice and turned his gaze to the beautiful adjutant's face. Veretta, if you want to ask my opinion, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed." "Your Highness?" Veretta called Ray Minkai not for any other reason, but because she was afraid that Ray Minkai would be bored by the competition in front of him. No matter how the outside world judged the selection of the strongest person in the empire led by Euphemia Libertania, in Veretta's heart, there was only one person who was the strongest in the empire. That was Ray Minkai. Although the competition in front of her was colorful, Veretta knew that Ray Minkai would probably not care about this. "Veretta, after this competition, all the victors would be handed over to Chief Instructor Chili Gu. No matter what their quality is, I have enough confidence in Chief Instructor Kiligu's teaching standards." Thinking of the training summary and some training photos he saw in the report, Ray Minkai could easily see the conclusion from the expressions of the knight who successfully survived the three big bug characters, Kiligu, Fianna, and Titania. Those were the faces of those who had escaped from death, yet they regarded the death training that almost cost them their lives as the most important memory in their lives, although it seemed a little contradictory. However, when the freshman knight solemnly stroked the right shoulder of the knight regiment, Ray Minkai knew that Ziliku, Fianna, and Titania had made the right decision as instructors of the knight regiment. "I understand." Veretta nodded slightly. While the two of them were conversing, the competition had already progressed to the next round. And this round happened to be the one that Ray Minkai was paying attention to. Rollo Lampy Roadbed. Ray Minkai's gaze crossed the sky and landed on the thin figure who was about to board the Lionheart Knight training vehicle. At this moment, the thin figure standing on the edge of the cockpit seemed to have noticed Ray Minkai's gaze, but he resisted the instinct to look back. He lowered his head and entered the cockpit of the Lionheart Knight. Rollo Lampy Roadbed. Looking at the cockpit that was slowly closing, Ray Minkai's mouth could not help but curl up slightly. Now that Lou Lucio had become a member of the Parliament of Destiny, and Charles had been buried in the world of C, Rollo's fate would probably no longer be related to the two. However, there were some doubts about his background as a member of the Empire's Secret Intelligence Bureau. When he saw Rollo's name and familiar face on the reserve list, Ray Minkai had asked State Zero to sneak into the headquarters of the Empire's Secret Intelligence Bureau located in the capital of Britannia to search for possible clues from the central computer. In the end, there was nothing. No, it was not that there was nothing. However, with the ability of State Zero of the White Cat, it could only find a cluster of data fragments hidden in the corner of the system that could not be restored. "Kai, that guy is coming for you. Why don't you kill him in advance?" As the signal for the competition sounded, the figure of State Zero of the White Cat also appeared on Ray Minkai's shoulder. Looking at the increasingly clear silhouette of the White Cat, Veretta subconsciously took a few steps back, leaving space for Ray Minkai and State Zero of the White Cat. However, Veretta's subconscious action was destined to be a waste of effort. Ray Minkai and State Zero of the White Cat communicated more through brainwaves on certain occasions. No, before he makes a move, his identity is still that of a reserve elite of the Personal Guard Knight Regiment. When Ray Minkai's laughter sounded in State Zero of the White Cat's mind, State Zero of the White Cat shook its head in boredom. If it were not for Ray Minkai coming today, State Zero of the White Cat would probably be rolling back and forth in its warehouse, enjoying the long-awaited cherry stone bath. Boom! The sound of violent impact exploded. It immediately attracted everyone's attention. Ray Minkai took a closer look. The moment the competition started, the winner of the two Lionheart Knight training models had already been decided. One hit. With just one hit, Rollo's Lionheart Knight training model with a blue horizontal line on its left shoulder defeated the opponent, and the Lionheart Knight training model with two vertical lines on its right shoulder. Everyone was stunned as they looked at the mech that fell to the ground. In everyone's perception, the competition had only started for a few seconds. In such a short period of time, the outcome of the battle had already been decided. State Zero, did you feel anything? Ray Minkai narrowed his eyes slightly. At that moment, Ray Minkai did not feel anything unusual, nor did he feel that his time was out of sync with reality. No. If it was said that Ray Minkai's time could be abnormal as a human, then as a metal life form, from an extreme point of view, State Zero, which could even be compared to objective non-living things, was highly likely not to be affected by Rollo's Geas. State Zero's denial gave Ray Minkai a glimmer of confidence. At that moment, Rollo might have activated his GASS, or he might not have. Regardless of whether he had activated it or not, it was inevitable that he had obtained a victory. Therefore, Ray Minkai raised his right hand and gestured towards Veretta. Seeing this, Veretta was stunned at first, then she stopped talking. Don't worry, Veretta, do it. Ray Minkai had already expected Veretta's reaction. He just smiled gently and urged Veretta to complete his order again. White Cat State Zero raised its head and looked at Veretta, whose eyes were faintly filled with worry. After walking down the high platform, it turned back to look at Ray Minkai. Minkai, didn't you already tell her the plan? What should be said? I've already said it. It's just that I'm too concerned and confused. Ray Minkai sighed, but did not continue in this aspect. He knew that if he aroused the gossipy soul of White Cat State Zero, it would not be able to calm down for a while. Is that so? White Cat State Zero blinked, then shrank back and hid itself in Ray Minkai's shadow. The roar of the mech body's operation sounded again, and the battle on the field erupted again. It was just that this was not a new round of the competition. Instead, it was the Lionheart Knight training type with a red vertical line on its right shoulder that had just been defeated in an instant. After it swept away the trailer that was trying to drag it out of the competition venue, it charged towards Rollo and obtained victory amidst a series of rumbling sounds. Boom! The iron fists of both sides violently collided at this moment, setting off a deafening sharp sound wave. Quick! Stop them. This competition is already over. Below the high platform, Veretta, who had just ordered her subordinates to bring Rollo over, was shocked. She immediately changed the order and gathered her subordinates to stop this battle that should have already ended. However, the Lionheart Knight training type did not listen to the order at all and stubbornly launched a fierce attack towards the mech body piloted by Rollo. The Knight's spear tore through the sky and attacked the blue-shouldered Lionheart Knight training type with the sound of the wind. It looked like it would not stop until it was dead. Are you unwilling to face reality? Are you still unwilling to admit defeat? Our Knight Order will definitely not accept such a person into our Knight Order. Seeing that her subordinates' shouts did not stop the rioting Lionheart Knight training type, Veretta snatched the communication device on the spot and sternly shouted to stop it. The result was still the same. No matter how Veretta and her subordinates shouted to stop the rioting Lionheart Knight training type, they were unable to change the situation from beginning to end. Bang! At the instant when the sound of metal colliding exploded, the Knight's spear in the hands of the rioting Lionheart Knight training type flew across the sky and deeply pierced into the flat ground in front of the high platform. In the blink of an eye, the dirt that splashed up hit the clean and tidy high platform, leaving a stain. Quick! Evacuate everyone! Quick! Although the Knight's spear that was sent flying did not hit the high platform, if this continued, it would inevitably... Wong! Suddenly, Veretta, who turned around and ran towards the high platform, preparing to take Rei Minkai away, froze in place, as if time had left her body. Boom! In the next second, not far from Veretta's left, the rioting Lionheart Knight training type was sent flying high into the air, smashing towards the high platform like a falling meteor. The huge shadow set off by it covered the sunlight shining on the high platform. Unexpectedly, no one on the high platform got up to escape, but just like Veretta, they froze in place, not noticing that their heads were shrouded by the shadow of death. The sound of the wind suddenly rose. The moment the steel giant that was sent flying reached the highest point, it was the moment when it fiercely smashed onto the high platform with a terrifying weight calculated in tons. At that time, the people who froze in place and did not notice, no, it should be said that the people who had their time taken away would inevitably lose their lives under the heavy pressure of this steel giant, becoming a member of the underworld. However, would the result really be like this? 1. As the shadow approached, a glimmer of light burst out from the void, enveloping the high platform like a flash of light. At the critical moment, it blocked the steel giant that was falling with a heavy wind pressure. The snow-white hair fluttered without the wind, and under the sharp claws that faintly revealed a trace of sharpness was the seat that was rapidly turning black due to the high temperature. The golden pupils that gradually bloomed with a terrifying brilliance first glanced at the steel giant that was blocked by the glimmer barrier, then shifted its gaze and looked at the culprit that sent the rioting Lionheart Knight training type flying. Who? The whistling of the wind did not stop because of the terrifying gaze. Instead, it became more and more intense. The falling steel giant was blocked, but the steel spear that was inserted into the ground was once again raised, and with a terrifying sound of the wind, it heavily pierced into the shadow of death that shrouded the high platform. Ka-cha! In the darkness, the lightning that erupted from the tip of the knight's spear and the glimmer barrier temporarily dispelled the darkness, allowing the Lionheart Knight training type to see the scene under the shadow. The pure white and flawless cat was staring at the steel giant that was waving the spear with its golden pupils. And behind it was Rei Minkai, who was sitting steadily on the seat. Kacha! In the flash of the sparks, Rollo, who was piloting the Lionheart Knight training type to launch an attack, actually saw Rei Minkai's pair of probing eyes and the smile at the corner of his mouth. The target, Rei Minkai, actually discovered my actions? How is this possible? My GESS is ineffective. Chapter 777. 5 Fingers. There were many meanings that could be represented. However, Rollo, who was sitting in the cockpit of the Lionheart Knight, knew that this represented the effective duration of his GESS. Every bend of his finger represented a new step towards the end of his GESS. 1. The high-speed pulleys under the Lionheart Knight's training vehicle suddenly reversed, driving the huge body to change from a forward state to a high-speed retreat state. The knight's spear that was in a deadlock with the shimmering barrier was abandoned by Rollo without hesitation, in order to escape from the strange, shimmering barrier as soon as possible. 5. The smile on Rei Minkai's face gradually became wider, and he bent the first finger of his open palm. Pong! Losing its owner's grip, the knight's spear that was charging towards the shimmering barrier fell heavily to the ground. Roar! Don't even think about escaping. The white cat, whose fur stood on end, roared. An even more ferocious and huge shadow rushed out from the white cat's body, like a lion pouncing on its prey, pouncing towards the rapidly retreating Lionheart Knight. If the shimmering barrier made Rollo choose to retreat without hesitation, then the appearance of the lion's shadow made Rollo decisively give up the idea of continuing the mission. The Empire's sacred beast, Longfong Lion State 0. It was a strange beast that appeared on the Empire's stage with the official identity of the Empire's sacred beast, since Euphemia, Libritannia, ascended the throne. No one knew what its true appearance was. Was it a cute, pure white kitten? Or was it a huge and ferocious steel lion? Or was it the terrifying lion that appeared in the form of a wild lion that was far taller than a human, and used its sharp claws and long sword to force the nobles to submit? No Britannians knew the correct answer. However, what they knew was that when the image that once brought fear to the nobles appeared, the only thing Rollo could do was to retreat without hesitation and decisively retreat. The dust raised by the high-speed pulleys formed a cloud of smoke in front of the Lionheart Knight training vehicle, as if trying to cover the Lionheart Knight's high-speed retreat. However, Ray Minkai bent another finger. 4. Roar. A terrifying roar swept over. His ferocious body tore apart the smoke and dust that filled the air. In the next moment, the Lionheart Knight was faced with the sharp claws of Wild Lion Zero. Clang! Seeing that the sharp claws were about to reach him, Lolo instinctively controlled the Lionheart Knight to draw the long sword at his waist and charge forward. However, the result was that the long sword in the hands of the Lionheart Knight was instantly broken by the Wild Lion Zero. Bang! At the same time that the broken sword was inserted into the ground, Luo used all of his strength to open up a large distance with the impact of Wild Lion Zero. Boom! When the ferocious wild lion landed on the ground, the surrounding dust scattered in all directions like a flock of frightened birds. It could no longer provide the slightest bit of cover for the Lionheart Knight training type. Not bad, but it ends here. The Wild Lion Zero's eyes were filled with murderous intent, and its right front claw was slightly forward. The next blow would definitely be the blow that would kill Luo. The moment the terrifying murderous intent shrouded Luo, he subconsciously looked at the sky. 3. Ray Minkai's countdown continued, as if he was counting the time that Luo could still survive in this world. The right eye that perched on the purple bird trembled. The moment Luo's Wild Lion Zero appeared, he constantly and secretly strengthened the power of his GSS. Unfortunately, in these short few seconds, not to mention the Wild Lion Zero, even Ray Minkai was not affected by Luo's increasing power of GSS. Such a strange scene, since Luo obtained the power of Geas and became an assassin of the Empire's Intelligence Bureau. He had never encountered such a strange scene. How is this possible? Luo clenched his teeth and once again pushed the power of Geas he possessed to a higher limit. However, his young and fragile heart was one step ahead of him. Bang! Bang bang! The rapidly beating heart was like a sad song filled with unwillingness, constantly pounding Luo's body. Even so, Luo was still persevering. He did not want to die here for no reason. Roar! The roar of a beast suddenly came. The ferocious figure shrouded the Lionheart Knight from top to bottom. At this moment, Luo had no way to escape. Looking at the golden flash that fell like thunder, the purple bird in Luo's right eye quietly disappeared. The next day, the Britannians in the imperial capital did not feel infinitely happy with the hope of a new day. On the contrary, the bright sunshine made everyone in the imperial capital feel cold. Especially the Lionheart Knight with the Royal Guard Knight's emblem on the right shoulder that was painted red, occupying the main streets of the imperial capital. Not many people dared to walk out of the streets on this sunny day. His Highness the Prince was assassinated. The moment the Royal Guard Knight's regiment appeared on the main street of the imperial capital, this news had already spread throughout the imperial capital. Originally, according to the imperial capital schedule, today was the day of a banquet to welcome the prince's return to the empire. However, this sudden grievous news shattered this beautiful arrangement. Among the people who heard this news, some were timid and hid at home. Some tried to use their own social circle to obtain more information, and some powerful people used official channels or their own intelligence channels to obtain more inside information. However, without exception, the prince who had just returned to the empire was injured by an assassin when he was inspecting the Royal Guard Knight's reserve selection. The news that the situation was unclear now gradually spread throughout the imperial capital. Your Highness, something bad has happened. Cannon rushed into the imperial residence where the empire's second prince, Schnetzel, was in a hurry. Something bad has happened? Cannon, for the current me, is there anything bad that can happen? The talented second prince, who had once been in charge of important political figures of the empire, calmly looked at his loyal adjutant, Canorn, who had remained by his side even though he had already retired from the empire's political scene and was now in the prime of his youth, only beginning his retirement life with his aged body. Your Highness, if it was something else, it wouldn't matter. However, this matter might cause unrest in the empire. Cannon looked at the somewhat fat Schnetzel and couldn't help but shout anxiously, "Oh, the empire's unrest?" The blond man who was sitting on the recliner moved his body slightly, as if he wanted to change into a more comfortable position. However, in the end, he gave up on this instinctive action. Is it UFFI? No. Is it about His Majesty's side? Yes. It's that night. The prince was assassinated. Cannon spoke halfway and couldn't help but pause for a moment. Then, he used a more formal name to describe the information he knew. Were you assassinated? Schnetzel's eyebrows twitched slightly. As the former prime minister of the empire, he had already guessed the general outline of the situation when Cannon finished speaking. Cannon, get ready. We need to make a trip to the palace. Cannon was startled, but he still nodded his head. Yes, I'll go make the arrangements now. However, before Cannon could turn around and leave, Schnetzel called out to him. Cannon, do you regret it? Following me to this residence and leaving the empire's politics from now on. Cannon stared blankly, as if he didn't understand why Schnetzel would ask such a question. In reality, Cannon only had one answer from the start. It had never changed. No, Your Highness, being able to follow by your side is the most glorious thing in my life. Even until the moment of my death, following by your side and experiencing things will be engraved in the deepest part of my soul. The adjutant's solemn oath didn't cause Schnetzel's expression to change. However, from Schnetzel's slightly trembling fingers, Cannon could see the ripples in the heart of the prince he followed. After a long while, Schnetzel sighed slightly. Is that so? Then I'll have to trouble you. Cannon, go make the preparations. Yes, Your Highness. After the adjutant's figure disappeared outside the door, Schnetzel raised his head and looked out the window, looking at the blazing flame that was slowly rising to the highest point. At this moment, the radiance released by the blazing sun was as dazzling as the empire under the control of Empress Euphemia that was advancing into the deep space of the universe. No matter how dazzling the radiance is, there still exists a darkness that makes one feel at a loss. Euphemia, Your Highness, what are you planning this time? In the room, shrouded in darkness, a ray of light lit up. A ray of light that could only illuminate half of the table in front of him. Sitting in the darkness, Lolo expressionlessly looked at the table that was illuminated by the light. He didn't care at all about the environment he was in and the treatment he would receive. From an outsider's point of view, the current Lolo was just like a puppet that had lost its soul, lifeless. Your Highness, why don't you start the interrogation immediately? Veretta asked puzzledly behind a wall made of one-way glass in the room. She couldn't imagine that an assassination actually happened and ended in her presence. What was even more unbelievable was that she was completely unaware of the assassination process. After the assassination was thwarted by Wild Lion State Zero, Ray Minkai placed the recording of the entire process in front of Veretta. Only then did Veretta realize that the world she was in wasn't that simple. Interrogation? No. We don't need these things. In fact, the moment the door is opened, other than me, State Zero, and His Highness, everyone else would have been instantly killed by him. Lolo. Although this guy isn't that strong, his Geas is the nemesis of most people. Geas, Your Highness, does this world really have such a frightening ability? Veretta remembered watching the recording of the assassination process. She saw that Lolo was completely unaware of the assassination, completely unaware that such a frightening expression was happening beside her. Yes, it's just that in some previous events, most of these Geas disappeared with the death of the 98th Emperor, Charles. However, I'm afraid that there are still some unknown geas hidden in the shadows of the world. Chapter 778. Geas. As one of the core settings of the entire story, it had unlimited possibilities and unimaginable abilities. After Charles was killed by Ray Minkai in the Sea World, the code ability he possessed was transferred to Euphemia. Most of the geas that existed in the world and was related to Charles and V had disappeared. However, there were still some remnants in the shadows. Lolo, who was lured out by Ray Minkai's simple trick, was one of them. It was so easy to capture Lolo, who occupied an important place in the original timeline. Ray Minkai did not know whether to be grateful or to laugh at those people hiding in the shadows. No, looking at Lolo, who was sitting in the dark, Ray Minkai thought of another possibility. That was the group of people hiding in the shadows who were extremely superstitious about the power of GASS. They were confident that they had the ability to freeze the biological time of their target. Lolo, who had succeeded repeatedly, would definitely be able to complete the mission. However, they did not know that when Ray Minkai saw the list of reserve personnel, he had already seen through the nature of Lolo, who looked harmless on the outside, but was actually a ruthless killer. Your Highness, is there really such a terrifying power in this world? Even after experiencing the time freeze caused by Lolo's geas, the illusory feeling still lingered in Veretta's mind. Didn't you just experience GESS? Ray Minkai looked at the brown beauty's doubtful face and nodded slightly. Veretta moved her lips, but still shook her head. Even so, I still don't have the slightest sense of reality. It's just that when it happened, my consciousness stopped. By the time I recovered, I already saw the scene of the Lionheart Knight training model being knocked to the ground by Lord Sacred Beast. That's inevitable if Kai and I did not share the same fate. I'm afraid he would not be able to escape from that strange ability. As the white cat's voice sounded, its figure appeared on Ray Minkai's shoulder. It glanced at Lolo, who had yet to make a move, before turning back to look at Veretta. Do you want to have such power too? Veretta was stunned. She didn't react for a moment, but she quickly shook her head. No, Lord Sacred Beast. Although GSS sounded very powerful, everything had its limits. To be able to obtain such terrifying power, I'm afraid that there must be even more stringent requirements, right? After a pause, Veretta voiced her final thoughts. Moreover, I don't think I have the aptitude and qualifications to obtain this power. It's a good thing to recognize your own abilities. Furthermore, UFFI, Her Majesty still hasn't figured out how to deal with this power. Ray Minkai was very satisfied with Veretta's calmness when faced with the choice of power. Your Majesty? Veretta looked at Ray Minkai in surprise. She detected a trace of truth from Ray Minkai's words. Could it be that Her Majesty Euphemia could bestow this power to others? Veretta, since you have already come into contact with GASS, then you should also have the qualifications to know the truth. However, once you take this step, it means that you can no longer retreat and leave my side. Ray Minkai stared at Veretta. Since the moment they met in District 11, the Brown Beauty's fate had been completely reversed. He slowly placed the choice in front of her face. To Ray Minkai's surprise, the Brown Beauty did not show any hesitation. With a solemn face, she bowed slightly to Ray Minkai and performed a knight salute. Your Highness, whether it is the grace of saving my life or the grace of recognizing my worth, it is enough for me, Veretta knew, to offer my unparalleled loyalty to your Highness. Therefore, I am willing to give my life and my heart for your Highness. At the end of her speech, Valetta's face blushed a deep shade of red. However, because Veretta lowered her head to salute Ray Minkai did not see this seductive scene. However, Ray Minkai had already heard the hidden feelings in the last half of Veretta's trembling voice. Ray Minkai let Veretta stand up straight again and reached out his right hand to push Veretta's scattered ponytail behind her back. At the same time, he softly told a secret that was still unknown to people. The 98th Emperor of the Britannia Empire, Charles di Britannia, is not missing. He was personally killed by me in the origin of GASS, the world of GASS. What? Although Rei Minkai's voice was gentle in Veretta's ears, it was as terrifying as a bolt from the blue. In shock, the brown beauty subconsciously took half a step back. Then, the shock on the brown beauty's face receded like the tide, leaving only a trace of calmness and determination. She gently exhaled, and her eyes were full of relief. "Your Highness, Veretta knew will follow your Highness until death." Rei Minkai looked at Veretta's performance and nodded slightly. "Among the nobles, and even among the common people, I'm afraid there are all kinds of rumors, right? Euphemia's success in ascending the throne not only shattered the illusion of many of Charles's descendants, but also shattered the future of many nobles. Especially when Euphemia announced the reform and used the power of the empire to march into the deep space. The nobles who had their power taken away from them hated it even more. In this case, all kinds of rumors were considered light. Heavy ones wasn't Rollo, who was isolated in a small dark room. A new example? Yes, Veretta responded. In fact, since the establishment of the Royal Guards Knight Regiment, I have received no less than 1,000 reports. The most common one is about the previous emperor being put under house arrest by your Highness, and the rumors that he used his male charms to bewitch Her Majesty Euphemia. Veretta, who spoke of the rumors she received, carefully looked at Rei Minkai's face. As a result, Rei Minkai did not show any abnormalities, but the white cat rolled on the ground laughing. "Ha ha 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 ha! I'm dying of laughter. Guy used a male voice to bewitch Euphemia. Ha ha ha! I'm dying of laughter." In the pure white fluff that kept rolling on the ground without a trace of dust was a kitten that kept twisting its body as it laughed. "Ha ha! Who is the one bewitching who? If it wasn't for Guy's timely appearance, I'm afraid Euphemia." What's so funny? The wild laughter of the white cat stopped abruptly. It turned out that Rei Minkai had unceremoniously twisted the gate of destiny behind the white cat's neck. Meow! The white cat, whose neck was twisted by Rei Minkai, instantly changed its face and meowed weakly. It did not have the fierce appearance of the Empire's sacred beast. Although it is a rumor, it is the truth. Veretta. The white cat's words were still echoing in Veretta's mind, and she did not react for a while. "Veretta? Veretta? What are you thinking?" It wasn't until Rei Minkai called out to her a few times that Veretta finally realized what was going on. However, Veretta, who reacted, shifted her attention to other places. For example, the sentence that the white cat mentioned just now. "Recently, I saw a confidential royal document about an assassination attempt on Her Majesty Euphemia during a trip a few years ago. Although the report did not say that Her Majesty Euphemia was harmed in any way, a large part of the content was intentionally deleted. Under the silver-gray bangs was a pair of eyes that shone with the light of gossip." Rei Minkai did not know what Veretta was thinking at the moment, but Veretta's attitude showed that she did not care and even forgot what Rei Minkai said just now. Was this a woman's nature of gossip? Or was it Veretta's way of showing her loyalty? Or both? Rei Minkai pondered for a moment, and finally decided to tell Veretta about his first encounter with Euphemia. Both of them understood that from this moment on, Veretta knew could no longer escape from Rei Minkai's palm. At the same time, in the side hall of the palace, Euphemia, who had changed out of her royal robe to disguise herself, was receiving Schnetzel, who had come to seek an audience. "Royal brother, long time no see. Looks like you've been doing well recently." Euphemia sat on the main seat, looking at her second royal brother, who had rushed from the royal courtyard to the palace. "Thank you for your care, Your Majesty. After getting rid of the busy work, I indeed have a lot more time to cultivate and recuperate." Schnetzel knelt on the ground and said respectfully, "Get up, royal brother. This is just a conversation between siblings." Euphemia did not intend to continue with the formalities between a ruler and a subject, but directly let Schnetzel get up and sit. "Thank you, Your Majesty." As Schnetzel sat down, he was surreptitiously assessing Euphemia's expression. In the end, he discovered that Euphemia was not as worried about the assassination attempt on the prince as the outside world had said. Moreover, the sharp-eyed Schnetzel had noticed something else. Euphemia did not mind his gaze, and instead looked at him calmly. "Royal brother, may I know why you're here today?" "Your Majesty, I heard that the prince had been assassinated. Being in the royal courtyard, I did not know what the situation was, and in my worry, I could only personally request an audience with your Majesty." "Oh, is that so? How thoughtful of you, royal brother. The prince is fine, but he needs some time to recuperate." Euphemia smiled, and then a look of scrutiny appeared in her eyes. "And, royal brother, you've come at just the right time. Right now, I need you to make an appearance." Schnetzel was taken aback, and then he felt that something was wrong. "Your Majesty, what are you talking about?" Euphemia's expression turned serious, and she said in a clear voice, "Due to the assassination attempt on the prince, he is temporarily unable to take charge of all matters of the Royal Guard Knight Regiment. So Royal Sister Cornelia has temporarily taken over all matters of the Knight Regiment. Your Majesty is wise. To be in charge of the Royal Guard Knight Regiment, one must have a close relationship with Her Majesty the Empress. Apart from Mecha, it was Cornelia, the second princess with illustrious military achievements. In addition, as Royal Sister Cornelia has to take over all matters of the Royal Guard Knight Regiment, she is temporarily unable to take care of matters related to the Empire's Prime Minister. So I will have to trouble Royal Brother to take charge of the Empire's Prime Minister for a period of time. Your Majesty is wise." Wait. After Schnetzel subconsciously responded, he suddenly realized that he seemed to have agreed to something incredible. "Your Majesty wants me to take charge of the Empire's Prime Minister again. What's wrong with that? Could it be that royal brother is now used to a leisurely and beautiful life and is no longer willing to contribute to the Empire's prosperity?" Euphemia looked at the rare look of surprise on Schnetzel's face and smiled softly. In truth, Schnetzel's visit this time was not only to obtain information about Mecha, but also to prove to Euphemia that he wasn't the mastermind behind the assassination attempt on Mecha. It must be known that Schnetzel, who had been in the imperial courtyard for a long time, hadn't interfered in matters related to the Empire for a very long time. However, Schnetzel's declaration didn't receive Euphemia's understanding. Instead, Euphemia suddenly used the reason that Cornelia couldn't take care of the Empire's affairs to push Schnetzel back to the position of Prime Minister. This left Schnetzel unable to make a choice for the time being. "Your Majesty, royal brother, are you still unwilling to do your part for the Empire?" Before Schnetzel could say anything, Euphemia mercilessly cut him off. Although the words were spoken softly, Schnetzel could feel the enormous pressure coming from the Empress. In that instant, Schnetzel could clearly sense that the third princess, who had once affectionately called him royal brother, and who was viewed by many members of the imperial family, and even himself as a vase, was no longer a simple and naive girl. Instead, she was moving towards maturity, becoming an empress worthy of the title of emperor. Under this pressure, Schnetzel subconsciously got up and once again knelt before the empress. He paused between each word, enunciating each word clearly in response to the empress's command. "Yes, your Majesty, if this is what you wish for." The empress looked down at her royal brother kneeling on the ground, nodded slightly, and then lifted her gaze to look in the direction of the audience room. In that case, I hope to see the Prime Minister personally step into the room tomorrow." "Yes, your Majesty." *Ka, *rumble. The slowly closing palace doors pulled Schnetzel's thoughts back to reality. When he came back to his senses, he discovered that his fingers, which were already showing signs of obesity, were still trembling slightly. He subconsciously clenched his fists and smiled wryly. This feeling, this pressure, I've only personally experienced it when facing the 98th Emperor, Father Emperor Charles, right? Chapter 779. When Schnetzel, who had been living in seclusion for a long time, once again appeared in front of the ministers and nobles, the instant he stood upright under the throne, Everyone's mind was immediately occupied by the rumbling sound. At this moment, there were doubts, joy, and even conspiracies. All kinds of thoughts accompanied each other, leading everyone's thoughts and words to run wildly in the direction of their guesses. Fortunately, before the chaos could spread, Cornelia, who appeared next to the throne, shouted to stop it all. Silence! Ministers! By His Majesty's decree, from today onwards, Schnetzel EI Britannia will be the Prime Minister of the Empire. The meeting room, which had just quieted down, exploded again. Discussions between the officials and nobles came one after another, hovering in the air above the meeting room for a long time. This made Cornelia look at Schnetzel and give him a look. Seeing this, Schnetzel knew it was time for him to take the stage. Ministers, silence. Thanks to His Majesty's grace, I, Schnetzel EI Britannia, am once again the Prime Minister of the Empire. I hope that, as before, you will join me in offering your loyalty and honor to His Majesty and protect the prosperity of the Empire together. Schnetzel's declaration caused the discussion to gradually stop. But in private, the nobles were communicating with each other with various looks, especially among certain groups. The buzzing sound of some kind of device being activated gradually filled the room, adding a hint of strangeness to the dimly lit room. At the same time, a hazy silhouette stepped into the room, stepping on the increasingly low, buzzing sound. He raised his head and looked around the dark room, but didn't seem to find anything. Then he sighed slightly. This was the first night since Schnetzel returned to the top of the Empire as the Prime Minister of the Empire. It was likely that this would be a sleepless night for the ministers and nobles of the Britannia Empire. You're panicking. A voice came from the darkness. Then, a light came from above, illuminating a certain area in the darkness. Under the white light, there was a man in a well-ironed suit with a tie clip with a purple flying bird pattern on the bottom of his tie. He wore a pair of white glasses on his face, and there was also a flying bird pattern on his forehead. The flustered man raised his head slightly and looked at the flying bird-masked man who had appeared under the light. I'm panicking. After all, Schnauzer is already kneeling before Her Majesty the Empress throne. Yes, I didn't expect Her Majesty to act so quickly. Another light came on. A woman in a long red dress, revealing her smooth shoulders, but her delicate face was mostly covered by an exquisite and gorgeous feather mask, chuckled as she spoke her opinion. This also means that the cute little guy has succeeded, doesn't it? We have no way of knowing what happened to the prince, even if we have full confidence in Lolo's geas. The flying bird-masked man looked at the lady in the red dress and voiced his doubts. Is that so? Then, Cornelia has been removed from the position of Prime Minister of the Empire and has been temporarily appointed as the commander of the Royal Guard Knight Regiment. Doesn't this prove something? The lady in the red dress chuckled and spoke of another piece of evidence. This time, the flying bird-masked man had nothing to say. Euphemia's maneuver not only pulled out Schnauzer, who had been in seclusion for a long time, but also stabilized the Royal Guard Knight Regiment that had almost fallen into chaos in the blink of an eye. Dare I ask, in the entire Britannia Empire, apart from the prince, who else could suppress those red-shouldered knights? There was no one else, only the Empire's Valkyrie Cornelia, Britannia. Then, why didn't Lolo come back? Looking at the argument between the flying bird-masked man and the lady in the red dress, the man in the shadows sighed. This was indeed the most crucial question. If the assassination of the prince had really succeeded, then Lolo, who possessed the unimaginable power of GSS, should have returned to the organization long ago. Why was it that even now, when Euphemia had used thunderous methods to suppress the hidden danger that was about to erupt in the blink of an eye, they still hadn't received any news from Lolo? That little fellow, could it be that he's already gone? The lady in the red dress was silent for a moment, and then asked the question that the three people present were unable to accept. Lolo, who possessed the power of Geas to stop the time of his target, naturally could easily escape if he wanted to. On the other hand, if he wanted to kill his target, it would be as easy as taking a stroll in the park, and he would be able to complete the mission just by walking past his target. With such a strange and powerful power protecting him, how could Lolo not appear until now? Lolo's power isn't omnipotent. At this moment, the flying bird masked man sighed and spoke of the fatal flaw of Lolo's geas. Lolo's geas can indeed stop the time of his target, but what about those outside the target? For example, what about the snipers lurking outside the venue, monitoring the situation in the surroundings? You must know that we've already done our best to send Lolo into the reserve force of the Royal Guard Regiment. Then, Lolo has already failed? In other words, that prince didn't suffer any injuries at all? The lady in the red dress seemed to be somewhat impatient. No, I don't know. Her Majesty's thunderous methods are too shocking, and we still haven't seen any flaws. The flying bird-masked man sighed, and then made another suggestion. I wonder if we can request to see Her Majesty. Her Majesty has already grown too much, and is no longer that simple little princess in our memories. His words received the lady in the red dress approval, and they both looked at the man standing in the shadows. Under the gazes of the two, the man in the shadows shook his head slightly and said regretfully, Her Majesty already knows about the current situation. However, Her Majesty's injuries are too severe and she can't meet guests for the time being. But please be at ease. Her Majesty has already given instructions regarding the current situation. I believe that you will soon see Her Majesty's instructions. The words of the man in the shadows didn't calm the hearts of the flying bird-masked man and the lady in the red dress, but only temporarily pacified the hearts of the two who had been somewhat flustered by Euphemia's thunderous methods. But it must be known that at the beginning of the conversation, he was the one who had panicked first. Is that so? Then, we'll wait and see what Her Majesty's arrangements are. As his voice fell, the lights enveloping the flying bird-masked man and the lady in the red dress extinguished one by one. You'll see. Darkness once again engulfed the room, and the man's low voice lingered in the room for a long time. A week had passed since Rei Ming-Kai's assassination attempt. The reinstated Prime Minister of the Empire, Scanazel, didn't act like some outside speculations, making drastic changes to the many administrative orders left behind by Cornelia the moment he took office. Instead, he followed Cornelia's original rhythm, as usual, and gradually implemented these new policies that, in the eyes of the older generation of nobles, were undoubtedly cutting meat from their bodies. For a moment, the older generation of nobles who originally thought that Scanazel's return to office would be able to fight for the benefits of their old generation of nobles were filled with complaints. But these mockery and criticism didn't attract Scanazel's attention. He continued to do as he pleased, and continued to implement the new policies that, on the surface, were Cornelia's, but were actually implemented by Euphemia's orders. Your Majesty, Scanazel is implementing the new policies according to plan. Is this really all right? In the palace garden, Cornelia, who had changed out of her martial attire and wore a rare court dress, sat in front of Euphemia and reported on the progress of Scanazel's work this week. Royal sister, in private, there's no need to be obsessed with how you address me. Just call me by my name like before. Euphemia first corrected Cornelia's way of addressing her, then continued. I'm not sure how to address you. Scanazel is very smart. Even though I didn't explain anything, he already knows most of the truth. Thus, he can be trusted, at least for now. Cornelia frowned. Scanazel was the most outstanding prince among the many heirs of the previous Emperor Charles, and his abilities were definitely trustworthy. But in terms of loyalty, Cornelia didn't trust this former second prince too much. After all, in the eyes of many nobles, Euphemia's rise to the throne was all due to external help, and not the approval of the empire's noble system. Does Scanazel know about the prince's situation? I'm afraid he's already guessed. But he didn't show any intention of asking. Euphemia thought back to her meeting with Schnetzel this week. Every time, Schnetzel would appear in a businesslike manner and leave as soon as he was done with his business. He didn't drag his feet at all. It seems that Scanazel is also waiting. Cornelia thought for a moment and finally came up with this answer. Perhaps, as the central figure of this assassination, Rei Minkai could only temporarily stay in the Royal Guard Knight's encampment, waiting for something to happen. Before that, apart from being tied down by a long backlog of official business, Rei Minkai was dragged by the excited Lloyd to the development center of the Royal Guard Knight's encampment to watch a program. Your Highness, I didn't expect you to bring back something good from your trip. I even brought back the free Gouda for you. The excited Lloyd pointed at the free Gao to place beside the Inferno Magic sword and shouted, "Cough! Calm down. Lloyd, you know the free Gouda?" Rei Minkai knew very well why Lloyd was so excited. But when he saw how familiar Lloyd was with the free Gauda's equipment, Rei Minkai was very surprised. Of course, you should know that in this period of time, apart from developing new technology, I've also been going to the world known as the Steel Pulla to take a look. Your Highness, look, this is the free Gouda I made. Lloyd cracked his fingers, then patted his head. He reached into his pocket and took out a steel pulla. It was the steel pulla body that was redesigned with the free Gouda as the prototype. Chapter 780. The incident of the prince's assassination not only affected the internal affairs of the empire, but also affected the diplomatic mission from across the world, the diplomatic mission led by Gidelia and Olga. Commander Olga, have you been able to contact His Royal Highness? Gidelia, who was sitting on the luxurious sofa, frowned deeply, looking particularly worried. No, Miss Gidelia, whether it's the identity of the Ironflower Regiment or Abro's official identity, I haven't received permission to see His Royal Highness. Olga stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, looking at the red-shoulder Lionheart Knight on the street in the center of the empire, and couldn't help but sigh. In his view, this was originally a very simple diplomatic mission. How did it become like this overnight? Every time he wanted to see the prince, Rei Minkai, even if he used his identity as a diplomatic mission, he could only get the reply that His Royal Highness was currently not available to see guests. It's the same on my side. Even if I see the Empress, I can only get the same answer. Gidelia faintly sighed. Without Rei Minkai as a middleman, Abro's diplomatic mission seemed to have encountered difficulties in moving forward. Affected by the assassination storm, the entire imperial capital fell into a tense state. Even if the wise second prince, named Skenetzel, became the prime minister of the empire again, he could only slightly suppress the impact of the assassination storm, far from being able to calm it down. Even as an outsider, Olga could clearly see this point. But for the diplomatic mission, the most important thing was to confirm Rei Minkai's status as soon as possible. But when Olga saw the red-shoulder Lionheart Knight on the street, he couldn't help but sigh. When can we see a turnaround in this predicament? Fortunately, when Olga and Gidelia couldn't grasp the imminent turnaround, a message came and became an opportunity to save them. The messenger from the City of Stars came. In the colorful brilliance, the Macross named Fairy was moving forward with its head held high. A few hours ago, after the Macross completed routine maintenance, it departed from the City of Stars and entered the space-time channel with a messenger to the Geas world. In the bridge, Hinana, whose petite body was buried in a pile of children, yawned and opened her eyes to look around. It's already set sail? Then, Hinana's head was gently knocked. You only know how to sleep. You don't even know you're setting sail. Hinana puffed her cheeks and muttered, Since there's an automatic navigation program, I don't need to monitor it all the time. That's just sophistry. Nana, you don't need to waste time and effort to keep an eye on it. Isn't that tiring yourself out? Hinana raised her little head and looked at her elder sister, who was knocking her little head with a matter-of-fact look. Nonsense. Himimi snorted and knocked on her sister's head again. She always relied on the excellent self-regulatory program to slack off. Then, she looked at the figure standing in front of the porthole. Long pink hair gently draped over her shoulders, covering most of her round shoulders, making her appear faintly discernible. Under the long pink hair was a white, sleeveless dress. From afar, the figure was different from the strong figure in her memory. Himimi scratched the back of her head helplessly at the frail figure. Originally, the person who should be comforted by others should be herself. Himimi, who was faced with her best friend who came back from the dead, but was unable to rescue her from the hands of the Destiny Council, was indeed depressed for a while. But before she could be comforted, she was surprised to find that the person who should be comforted was her teacher, Lux Klein. There was no other reason. It was a piece of news from the Geas world. It was a piece of news that made Lux, who was dealing with the backlog of diplomatic affairs due to her disappearance, confused and made frequent mistakes. Inspector Ray Minkai was assassinated. Situation unknown. When the news came, it did cause a small commotion. But in the end, it gradually calmed down under Lux's arrangements. But as a bystander, Mimi knew that her teacher, Lux Klein's heart was in a mess. Even though her methods and speed in dealing with matters were no slower than before, Mimi could tell that something was amiss from the strokes of Leica's signature. Therefore, after Lux finished dealing with all the affairs, Mimi decisively pulled Lux out of the office with the excuse of returning for an inspection and set off for the Geas world. "Sister, do you think Teacher Lux is—" "Don't talk nonsense." Mimi patted her sister's little head. "But isn't this what happens when a loved one is in an accident and his life or death is unknown?" Nana hugged the black and white furry Gun doll and enjoyed the comfort of its fur, while recalling the plots she had seen in those messy romance dramas. Stop watching those messy dramas. Unexpectedly, Nana's little head was knocked by her sister once again. Nana raised her small hand and touched her head that didn't hurt much. She looked at her elder sister and muttered to herself, "If Teacher Lakis is worried about the patrol officer, then sister, are you worried about your lesbian boyfriend?" Of course, Nana did not dare to say this out loud. The consequences were obvious. Even if Lux was magnanimous and did not make a fuss about it, her sister would definitely find fault with her and teach her a lesson. After messing up Nana's beautiful blonde hair, Mimi stopped in satisfaction. "How long until we reach the Geas world?" Nana pouted and shook her head casually. She used the nanomachines all over her body to tidy up her long hair that was messed up by Mimi. Then, she summoned a light screen. "We have passed through the space-time node. The ship will enter the Geas world in half an hour. However, the ship cannot land directly on the surface. We have to send an application to the Imperial Throne before we can land through the Imperial Throne's port and teleport to the capital of the Britannia Empire." Nana's explanation of the next itinerary finally attracted the attention of the pink figure standing in front of the porthole. "Nana, the Britannia Empire does not allow us to land directly on Earth." Lux shifted her gaze away from the colorful and ever-changing space-time channel and looked at Nana. Nana nodded and moved the light screen in front of Lux. "Teacher Lux, this is the information that the Britannia Empire informed the agency in the name of Empress Euphemia not long ago. Due to the impact of the prince's attack, the information and communication channels inside and outside the Empire are currently restricted. So, we can only go through the Imperial Throne and land in the capital of the Britannia Empire." Unexpectedly, Mimi smelled something fishy from this. However, as her teacher, Lakis Klein, had already guessed the source of the abnormality before her. Although the worry between Lux's eyebrows did not disappear, it dissipated a little compared to before the departure, and the brilliance in Lux's eyes became brighter. Seeing this, Mimi and Lux looked at each other subconsciously and couldn't help but think of their father's private complaints. How can ordinary people provoke the haters? "Teacher, did you think of something?" Under her sister's urgent gaze, Nana asked timidly. I thought of something." Lux didn't hide her thoughts. To her, Mimi and Lux were not only her students, but more often than not, they were more like sisters. Lux smiled, and her eyes flashed with the brilliance of wisdom. The news of the assassination shouldn't be fake. It's just that the result might not be what the outside world said. I'm afraid that the Empress sitting on the throne of the Empire has other plans." "Plans?" Mimi and her sister looked at each other again, and then they suddenly understood and said, "Oh, could it be?" "Maybe, but we have to go there and see the situation." Based on the current information, Lux, who had roughly inferred the current situation of the Britannia Empire, gradually calmed down. Lei Mingkai shouldn't have encountered any accidents. Thinking about it, it makes sense. Recalling the memory of when she and Ray Mingkai were in trouble together, Lux couldn't help but smile. The MDE bomb that annihilated the entire fleet didn't kill him, and instead saved her along the way. The scene of them falling into the iron and blood world of Gauda together made Lux couldn't help but feel that she was in a mess when she heard that Ray Mingkai was assassinated and that she kept making mistakes. But Lux didn't regret being so flustered. Mimi, Nana, thank you. Lux, who had figured out the ins and outs of everything, sighed and thanked Mimi and Lux. If it weren't for the sisters finding a reason to pull her out of the office, she might still be thinking about nonsense and unable to take this crucial step due to her identity as the universe's diplomatic ambassador. No, this is nothing worth thanking. Teacher. Mimi waved her hands, indicating that she didn't do anything at all. No, this is already helping me. Mimi, besides, your current state of mind isn't any calmer than mine, is it? After all, Lux was her student. When Lux's state of mind calmed down, she saw through Mimi's chaotic state of mind. The reason was most likely that Annan, who should have been resurrected from the dead, was replaced by Princess Nunnally of the Britannia Empire as the crown prince. Chapter 781. On the Blue Planet, the huge satellite fortress that had attracted the attention of the world since it appeared in this world was operating on its original orbit as usual. Its existence was like the sword of Damocles hanging over the heads of all living beings on Earth, constantly reminding them of the crisis that existed in the starry sky. For the countries on Earth, this was unfortunate but also fortunate news. Unfortunately, the satellite fortress that crossed the starry sky, called the Throne of Command, did not belong to one of them. Fortunately, this terrifying satellite fortress belonged to the current empress of the Britannia Empire, Euphemia. At this moment, a space battleship that came from another dimension was following the guidance from the Throne of Command and slowly sailing to the final destination of this journey. Connection signal confirmed. The Macross ferry has confirmed the landing route. Please start the guidance. Although she was lazy, when it was time to work, Hinana quickly entered a serious state and meticulously carried out the landing operation of the battleship. Welcome to the Throne of Command. It hasn't been long since the last time we met. Following the completion of the signal connection, a pink figure suddenly appeared in front of Hinana in a flash of light. She was Velvet, who appeared in the form of a holographic image. Seeing her appearance, Lakis, who was sitting next to her, suddenly recalled all the information about this name in her mind. Velvet, the princess of the Empire from the destroyed Soth world of mechanical beasts. After being resurrected for unknown reasons, she became a dual soul existence with Sharon from Transdimensional Fortress Plus. Of course, the reason for this strange phenomenon was probably the deep affection that Velvet had for someone. Otherwise, how could Sharon, who was extremely afraid of the pioneers before she grew up, be willing to accept herself as a dual soul existence? It should be known that in the more distant past, in a universe even further away from the present, there was a case where Sharon resolutely erased her existence in order to not be bound by anything. Your Highness Velvet, today is your day? Obviously, compared to Lakis, Hinana was more used to facing Velvet, who was a dual soul. Sort of. As soon as Sharon heard the news that someone was injured, she directly left the Throne of Command and ran down. Velvet sighed, and her eyebrows were full of worry. Injured? As soon as she heard Lakis' doubts, a light flashed in Velvet's eyes. Of course, due to the strangeness of Velvet herself and the influence of the holographic image, this light couldn't be seen by others. Even Hinana, who had powerful computing power, couldn't see through it. Yes, this is the news from the royal family. Prince Ray Mingkai was attacked by an assassin with the power of Gias when he was inspecting the reserve selection competition. Gia's power. Is that the thing that can achieve all kinds of strange powers in this world? Mimi, who had once roamed this world, exclaimed in surprise. She clearly remembered that before that, Euphemia had already seized code, which could bestow the power of Geas to others. It's a remnant of the past. Velvet sighed and continued. Originally, Her Majesty didn't want to pursue the flaws left behind by the late Emperor Charles. But now it seems that these flaws have become an obstacle for the Empire to move forward. So, Her Majesty the Empress of the Britannia Empire planned this incident. What Velvet didn't expect was that Lakis, who was disturbed by the news of Rey Minkai being injured by an assassin, suddenly saw through some truth. Velvet was obviously stunned for a moment, then she smiled. When she wanted to use this to cover up her surprise, she unexpectedly saw Lakis' smile that saw through everything. She didn't see through it long ago, did she? Velvet exclaimed in surprise, but her face returned to calmness. As expected of a Universal Peace Ambassador. Sure enough, she saw through it all at once. Not at all. To me, this is just a method that I learned and used when I was young. There's nothing worth praising. Lakis smiled lightly. Her attitude was very humble. Is that so? It seems that this is also a compulsory course for the Universal Peace Ambassador. It's really an eye-opener, isn't it? No, it's just something that I got from my father's book collection when I was young. The back and forth between the two of them caused the Himimi sisters to exchange glances with each other. The petite Hinana even subconsciously shrank into the pile of dolls. It feels a little scary. This is a war between women. Himimi blinked her eyes, suddenly feeling that the Lakis in front of her was a little unfamiliar. Fortunately, the confrontation between the two women was only a matter of a few minutes. After probing Lakis' position with a few words, Velvet also returned to the original topic. Everyone, in accordance with Her Majesty the Empress's decree, although everyone can enter the Empire's territory through the control throne, Her Majesty still hopes that everyone will not bring all the equipment and warships from Star Glory City into the Empire's territory, in order to prevent any provocation that would cause the situation to go out of control. After saying that, Velvet added another sentence. Of course, personal equipment will not be included in the list. Wait, I have a question. Hinana immediately raised her tender white hand. Ms. Hinana, please go ahead. Does personal equipment include my own? As Hinana spoke, a purple light screen appeared around her body. That was the Klein force field unique to the Azure Core. Seeing this, Vervian revealed a smile that said, as expected. Of course, Her Majesty has already expected Ms. Hinana to ask such a question. Therefore, Her Majesty believes that Ms. Hinana's life form is extremely special, and she only needs to leave the Macross sprite in the control throne. Understood. Then I have no questions. This conversation seemed to have no problems, but in fact, both sides knew that the existence of the Macross sprite was not as simple as ordinary people thought. In fact, as long as it was easy for Hinana, and under the condition of ensuring sufficient supplies, Hinana could summon the Macross sprite at any time and place, regardless of space barriers and distance. Then, if there are no questions, let's get off the ship. There are some things that I need to talk to Her Majesty in person. In between the words, Lakis seemed to have put someone aside, but Velvet knew that Lakis was here to settle accounts. Achoo! In the depths of the Royal Guard Knight Regiment, a loud sneeze came from Royd's private research room. It was so shocking that Royd, who was sketching the design, deviated a large part of the stroke, causing the weapon design that was about to be completed to be completely scrapped. It also caused Cecil, who was sitting in front of the computer and focused on calculating the output power of the power furnace, to input a few characters incorrectly, causing the entire simulation program to go wrong. He had to face the situation of having to overturn and redo it. The culprit helplessly held a tissue, covered his mouth and nose, and smiled bitterly. Sorry, I didn't mean it. That being said, but the sneeze that scrapped the work that the two painstakingly worked on was not so easy to cover up. Really, is there something wrong with His Highness? If so, why don't you go back and rest first? Although Cecil was a little unhappy, he did not dare to be too presumptuous in front of the prince. However, Roy narrowed his eyes slightly, and a fox-like smile appeared on his lips. Allah, Allah, Cecil, you don't understand. How is your Highness feeling unwell? Clearly, someone is talking about your Highness the Prince. Isn't that right? Royd simply crumpled the scrap design into a ball and threw it into the trash can. He took large, strange steps and came to Ray Minkai's side, looking up and down at Ray Minkai. That presumptuous gaze almost made Cecil go forward and pull him back. Someone is talking about me? Don't tell me they want to know if I'm dead or alive. What are you talking about, Your Highness? Maybe His Majesty is thinking about you. Royd stretched out his finger and shook it, then said, "At 8 o'clock. His Majesty sent someone to inquire about the progress of the project. 2 hours later, His Majesty sent someone again to ask if the project needed help and if the development resources were sufficient. An hour ago, after lunch, His Majesty once again sent someone to ask if the food supply for the project developers was guaranteed." Cecil also said, "Although this is His Majesty's concern about the progress of our project, in our eyes, I'm afraid he's concerned about your Highness' health." Royd immediately clapped his hands and exclaimed, "That's right. Yes, yes. 10 minutes ago, His Majesty sent a message through an encrypted channel. He said that a foreign diplomatic mission is about to visit and needs our team to send technical personnel to prepare for a technical exchange." A foreign diplomatic mission? Royd and Cecil's echoes made Ray Minkai smile bitterly, but the last sentence caught Ray Minkai's attention. Currently, the diplomatic missions in the Britannia Empire, other than the friendly countries on Earth, were only Gudelia and Olga from the Iron and Blood world of Gouda. Other than that, there will be other diplomatic missions coming. They're here to cause trouble. Kai. At this time, White Cat State Zero's voice sounded, and its figure appeared at the top of the computer. The pair of golden pupils with a hint of ridicule stared at Ray Minkai. There was no doubt that it was waiting to watch a good show. They're here to cause trouble? White Cat State Zero laughed, stretched out its paws, and gestured. "I didn't expect you to unknowingly provoke 3 princesses with the same hair color. TSK, TSK. Chapter 782. Royal Carriage. This ceremony, which had been of great diplomatic importance in the past, had been left aside at Euphemia's accession and was seldom used. In the eyes of some nobles who value tradition, this empress who gradually displayed her power was betraying the empire's traditions. But on this day, the nobles who woke up from the shadow of the assassination that shrouded the imperial capital suddenly saw a carriage with the imperial royal insignia slowly driving along the main road of the imperial capital towards the imperial palace in the distance, under the protection of the imperial royal guard's knights. In an instant, the shocked nobles sought answers from their own sources. In the end, they were depressed, but also seemed to be filled with a trace of unfathomable hope. It was a diplomatic ambassador from the Abro Economic Circle. In this gloomy moment in the imperial capital, he was summoned by the empress sitting high on the throne. Furthermore, she used such a traditional but extremely ostentatious method to announce it to the world. I'm afraid that from now on, the entire imperial capital will be stirred up by this small carriage. Lakis, who had put down the curtains covering the window, retracted her gaze from the outside world and looked at Gudelia, who was sitting opposite her and seemed to be a little uneasy. "Why, Gudelia, I haven't seen you for a while, but you've become a little hesitant." Gudelia, who was a little uneasy, crossed her arms and twisted her fingers. She subconsciously glanced at Himimi and Himimi sitting next to her and asked softly, "Lady Lakis, thank you very much for your help. You brought me to meet Her Majesty, but I don't know what Lady Lakis thinks of this incident." Looking at the uneasy Gudelia, Lakis couldn't help but chuckle. It seemed that this prince assassination not only affected the empire, but also other visitors who came to visit the empire. This might be an accident, but it was indeed a necessary accident. After leaving the throne, Himimi and Gudelia didn't immediately head to the imperial palace. Instead, they used the identity of Abro's diplomatic ambassador to find Gudelia, who was feeling uneasy in the embassy, and invited her to the imperial palace. On this basis, he also reminded Olga to give his subordinates some free time to do their own things. Olga was very confused about this. In his opinion, after such a serious assassination, the imperial capital would be under martial law for some time. Under this layer of relationship, these unrelated diplomatic missions should put away their mentality and wait for the next news in the embassy. There was nothing wrong with Olga's choice. It was just that she was somewhat constrained. This was not in line with the current situation, nor was it in line with Her Majesty's expectations, nor was it in line with a certain someone's thoughts. However, even though she was confused, Olga still accepted Lux's suggestion after thinking for a while. Thus, after Gedelia boarded the royal carriage carrying Lakis and Himimi, Sino's group quickly received permission to leave. Are you talking about Kai's assassination? When Lux mentioned that matter, she didn't seem as anxious as Gedelia had expected. Instead, she seemed unbelievably relaxed. Yes, Gedelia was stunned for a moment before she nodded subconsciously. I've already heard from Mei about the assassination attempt on Guy. However, I don't think Guy is the kind of person who would be easily assassinated by despicable thieves. Lux's words revealed her strong trust in Rei Mingkai, making Gedelia speechless for a moment. Miss Gedelia, are you trying to say that if Rei Mingkai wasn't injured or even killed in the assassination attempt, then what's up with the Royal Guard Knight Corps standing on the street? At this moment, Himimi exposed Gedelia's thoughts. Yes. Gedelia nodded instinctively. However, she didn't expect Inanna, who was hugging a plush doll, to retort when she nodded. Teacher, didn't you say that Gedelia was by your side for a period of time? Why didn't you see that? Teacher. Seeing the shock on Gedelia's face, Lux smiled gently. Yes, Mei and Nana were by my side for a period of time. But, Gedelia's doubts deepened. From the looks of it, Lux was only 15 to 16 years old, and Himimi was the same. Himimi and Nana were so close to their age, yet they called her teacher? This question, Himimi and Nana naturally wouldn't be courting death by answering. On the other hand, Lux gently changed the topic. Look, we've arrived at the palace. If you have any questions, you can ask after seeing Her Majesty the Empress. The huge palace gates slowly opened. The guards on both sides of the road stood straight, displaying their proudest and most confident posture in front of the visitors. This was a moderately large demonstration of strength. At the end of the road, among the crowd in the vast royal square, there was the Empress wearing a crown and the Empire's second princess, who was in military uniform and temporarily took over the Royal Guard Knight Corps. Looking at the slowly approaching carriage, the Empire's second princess Cornelia moved her lips and looked at her younger sister, the current Empire's Empress Euphemia, but she didn't say a word. Royal sister, if you have something to say, just say it. There are no outsiders here. Euphemia naturally noticed her sister's gaze. Moreover, after she spoke, the attendants standing behind them all took a few steps back, giving the two royal sisters some private space to talk. Cornelia was a little hesitant, but she still sighed. Although I didn't feel anything before. Don't you feel that there are more people? People? Euphemia froze for a moment, then chuckled. Is that so? I still feel that there are fewer people. UFFI, before Cornelia could finish her words, a stream of light descended from the void, and a dreamy figure appeared beside Euphemia. Vervian, who had long pink hair but was tied up high, had changed into a Chinese-style Cheongsam and came here to welcome the arrival of that person together with Euphemia. UFFI, she's here. The royal carriage ostentatiously made a trip down the imperial capital's main road, and the waves it caused became more and more tumultuous. What does Her Majesty the Empress want to do? Not only did she not give the order to thoroughly investigate the assassination, she instead swaggered to meet that diplomatic group. It was still that dusky room. It was still the same 3 people. The topic was still about the assassination of Rei Mingkai. Only this time, the atmosphere between the 3 people did indeed have a slight change. Are you afraid? Or should I say that cute little fellow hasn't been caught? The lady in the red dress waved the fan in her hand, the corners of her mouth slightly raised as she spoke. In her opinion, Her Majesty the Empress' insignificant, yet extremely ostentatious actions were just a show of strength. Is it possible that Luo is hiding somewhere in the palace? The flying bird-masked man proposed a hypothesis. If after Luo failed to assassinate Rei Mingkai, he wasn't caught and turned to hide in the palace, then Her Majesty the Empress' sudden ostentatious actions could be explained. You're saying that Her Majesty the Empress wants to use herself as bait to lure Luo into the trap? The man standing in the shadows sneered. What a joke! That Her Majesty the Empress disgracefully seized the power of code from His Majesty. Naturally, she wouldn't fear Luo's geas. No matter how terrifying Luo's geas is, it wouldn't be able to affect the Empress who has the power of code. Pausing, the man sneered again. You must know that our Her Majesty the Empress isn't a naive, cute, and weak woman. She's the Iron Lady who killed her father to seize the throne. Then why do you think that Her Majesty's actions are for? If she didn't give the order to thoroughly investigate the assassination and only place the Royal Guard Knight Regiment inside and outside the imperial capital, what is the purpose of this? The lady in the red dress, right hand, that was waving the fan paused as she raised a rather sharp question. Wait, that Her Majesty the Empress is waiting. Just like a puppet sitting on the throne of the Empire's Prime Minister, Schnetzel, waiting. The words of the man in the shadows made the flying bird-masked man somewhat puzzled. Wait? What are they waiting for? Of course, they're waiting for an opportunity to change the situation. The man in the shadows sneered again and again. Although this is a safe and feasible method, that Her Majesty is waiting like this, she's missed a great opportunity. Originally, we were worried that Luo's assassination would lead to Her Majesty the Empress targeting all the nobles of the Empire. But we overestimated Her Majesty the Empress's decisiveness and unyieldingness. But this is inevitable. Even when Her Majesty was still here, it would be difficult for her to carry out a forceful bloodbath against the increasingly bloated and intertwined nobles. If that's really the case, wouldn't we have the initiative? The lady in the red dress eyes narrowed slightly, as if she was imagining something. No, not yet. We still don't know if Luo is still alive. The flying bird-masked man interrupted the lady in the red dress fantasy. However, in the next moment, a voice appeared, but made the three of them stare blankly at first, then kneel on the ground with faces full of pleasant surprise. There's no need to worry about this. Luo, my loyal servant, he's still alive. He's somewhere in the Imperial Palace. Your Majesty, you've already completely recovered. The man kneeling in the shadows raised his head in extreme, pleasant surprise and looked in the direction of the voice. But he could only see that in the darkness, there seemed to be a figure that was like an iron tower. Just like the figure standing on the supreme throne back then, he was as imposing as the figure standing on the supreme throne. Chapter 783. Under the blue sky and white clouds, there was a snow-covered mountain peak and a path down the mountain ridge from the snow-covered mountain peak to the beautiful green valley. Under the bright sunlight, the animals that lived in this mountain range with obvious seasonal changes popped their heads out of their safe nests one after another, looking around at their surroundings. Rumble, however, under the beautiful sunlight, it was not a peaceful life as usual, but a valley that was shattered by a sudden change. Boom! The arms that were dyed black by the smoke of gunpowder, the chest armor that was shattered and painted bright red, the KMF that was originally elegant but was now burned by the flames of war, leaving only the tattered fragments of the waste, rushed into the valley with a rumble. This was the KMF named Negid Thomel, and it was also the special airframe of the Gilkston Kingdom's King Sherial. Why would the special airframe of the king of a kingdom appear here, and with a miserable appearance, as if it had survived a fierce battle? The buzzing sound of the system performing an emergency self-check sounded in his ears. The young man who was piloting the airframe, named Negid Thomel Sherial, the king of the Gilkston Kingdom, took off his headphones and looked back. It was a seat specially designed for the holy priest of the Gilkston Kingdom, which was also Sherial's sister, Sherial. This specially designed seat could not only resist the overload brought by the KMF during the fierce battle, but it could also allow Sheriel, the holy priest of the Gilkston Kingdom, to enter a deeper level of meditation. From there, she could obtain more prophecies from the long river of fate and time. And now, Sheriel, who had fought his way out of the fierce battle with great difficulty and piloted his airframe into this peaceful valley, was waiting for the next prophecy. Under the high-strength bulletproof glass was the beautiful face that Sheriel was familiar with. Long golden hair that was scattered, snow-white skin, a calm and stable face. It comforted Sheriel's heart that had been repeatedly wounded in the fierce battle. Beep, beep. On the glass, the signal light that was undulating like breathing suddenly emitted a rapid notification sound that made Sheriel come back to his senses. "Sister, you're awake." Under the glass cabin that slowly opened, there was a pair of eyes that slowly opened and flashed with purple light. "Sheriel, have we entered the Empire's territory?" After recovering from her meditation, the blonde beauty subconsciously moved her right hand and touched the secret compartment on the right side of the seat. There was a small pistol that was loaded and ready to fire at any time. When her slender fingers touched the cold handle, the blonde beauty who had just woken up couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Have we returned to this moment? In front of him was his younger brother, who was looking at him with concern and waiting for his prophecy. In his mind, he was recalling the memories of his death again and again. From the distant past, when he was judged to be dead, he brought back a huge amount of memories. Once, twice, 3 times, 10 times, or more than 100 times. Shyamuna had already lost count of how many times she had passed through death recall. Amidst the chaotic and massive memories of death, Shyamuna could only see one crucial point. Someone was stopping him from entering the imperial capital to meet the Empress. Was it the church? As time passed, the chaotic memories of her death gradually became clearer. The mastermind behind the chaos gradually emerged before Shyamuna's eyes. That's right. It was the church. It was the church that was supposed to be destroyed with Charles's death. After Euphemia Libertania, the new empress, ascended the throne, Shyamuna, who was inextricably linked to the church but had left the church long ago, was naturally appointed by Empress Euphemia to investigate all kinds of ruins around the world and the church hidden in the shadows. It was the church that was once controlled by V and explored ancient ruins around the world in an attempt to obtain some kind of power from them. Big sister, big sister. While thinking, Shyamuna heard her younger brother's anxious call. She looked up and smiled at Sheriel. Unexpectedly, such a simple action caused Shyamuna to feel a sharp pain. Under the intense pain, the beautiful smile became a little distorted, which made Sheriel's heart ache. Big sister, is it because I was too focused on the battle and didn't take care of your body's endurance? Sheriel subconsciously reached out his hands to help Shyamuna, but she rejected him. Sheriel, now is not the time to talk about this. Has the body's emergency self-examination been completed? Shyamuna took a deep breath and tried to calm the tiredness that came from the depths of her soul. The death rewind ability could allow the current Shyamuna to avoid the inevitable death that would befall the Shyamuna who had already died in the future. However, everything in the world had all kinds of costs. Such a heaven-defying and almost prophetic power was activated again and again without any restrictions. The result was that the limits of Shyamuna's mind, body, and even soul were constantly being broken. If, in the following breakout, if Shyamuna couldn't find a way to break out of the encirclement and reach Empress Euphemia's side in a short period of time, then she would be lost in the death rewind of the long river of time. Yes, Sheriel naturally didn't know the true nature of the Gia's power that Shyamuna possessed. He simply thought that Shyamuna was tired from meditating in the long river of fate. Now it's 60% done. It still needs about 10 minutes. Stop this self-examination. Sheriel, there's a stray bullet wound on Najid's left leg. Although it's not big, it's already affecting Najid's movements. In addition, There's a small fragment at the junction between the right shoulder and the torso. You should be able to deal with it now. Sheriel, as usual, under Sheriel's expectant gaze, Shaimyuna gave the prophecy that he was looking forward to. Yes, I'll deal with it now. The hatch opened, and the nimble Sheriel quickly left the cockpit to repair Najid's malfunction. It's all thanks to Her Majesty's grace. If it was the Sheriel who couldn't move freely in the past, I'm afraid I would have to spend more effort. The princess, who possessed the death rewind ability side, she once again touched the hidden compartment with a pistol and grabbed the cold handle. Then, without hesitation, she decisively aimed the muzzle at her own head. Bang! The cockpit was filled with blood as Shaimyuna activated Geas again. The sun was still bright and beautiful. The valley was still peaceful. However, Najid, who was flying at high speed, was being chased by several unidentified KMFs covered in pitch-black cloaks. The roar of the 20mm autocannon tore through the sky and scattered a dense net of bullets in front of Najid, trying to force Najid to stop. However, Sheriel, who was piloting Najid Thumel, relied on his excellent driving skills and Najid Thumel's excellent performance to pass through the net of bullets. However, the moment Najid passed through the net of bullets, he was still hit in the right shoulder by the fragments produced by the explosion. The powerful impact almost caused Najid to lose most of his speed and fall into the enemy's encirclement. Damn it, you sinners! Kaleo was infuriated. He wanted nothing more than to turn around and fight these unknown assailants to his heart's content. However, he couldn't do that at this moment, because behind him was his sister who was meditating and trying to obtain a new prophecy from the long river of fate. For this, not only did Sheriel fall into a bitter battle, but he also lost an entire elite team that escorted the sisters as they wandered the world in search of various ruins lost in the corners of the world. It was an attack that caught everyone off guard. Godlywood Island. It was an inconspicuous island in the western Pacific Ocean. At first, after searching many ruins, Sheriel and the others didn't raise their guard much. They only treated this island as a hidden ruin that was uninhabited. Even after they landed on the island, Shamina issued many prophecies to Sheriel and the others to be vigilant and guard against attacks. However, she couldn't avoid the fate of the elite team, led by Sheriel being annihilated from the moment they landed on the island. Sheriel, descend. After entering the valley on the right, there will be a cave that leads to the underground river. In the roaring explosion, Shamuna's prophecy sounded. Understood. As Sheriel responded, Najid quickly rushed out of the enemy's net of bullets and rushed into the valley below. Before the enemy could react, he raised the spear in his hand and smashed the top of the cave in one breath, using the rubble to cut off the possibility of the enemy's pursuit. Amidst the rumbling sound of the falling debris, the searchlight gradually turned on by Najid Thumel emitted light. In the cockpit, Shamuna's right hand that was touching the secret compartment relaxed slightly. She couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. It seemed that the choice this time wasn't wrong. For the time being, they were safe. However, Shamuna, who walked through the return of death once again, had discovered the truth hidden in Godlywood Island. Spectre, that spectre that was supposed to be dead, yet appeared once again. No. Looking at the light that illuminated the pitch-black cave in front of her, she recalled the stalwart figure she saw standing on the high platform in the depths of Godlywood Island. Looking at the virtuous woman who was once praised by the world standing beside the stalwart figure, Shamuna couldn't help but reveal the chilling truth hidden behind the mystery of the church. That's just a replica with the name of a spectre. Chapter 784. Once upon a time, in the world of sea, Shaimuna witnessed the Britannia Empire's 98th emperor, Charles, and his wife, Princess Mariana, being killed by Ray Minkai with her own eyes. Regardless of whether it was her personal opinion or objective proof, the death of the King of Terror, Charles di Britannia, who once shook the world and made every country in the world fearful, was an irreversible fact. However, on that Divinewood Island, What Shaimuna saw was a familiar figure, a familiar face. Perhaps, when she looked back at that moment from the countless memories of death recall, Shaimuna would see the truth hidden behind that figure. Cloning. Although Shaimuna had left the church long ago, those research projects that had existed since the birth of the church and continued to expand according to the advancement of modern technology, Shaimuna had long heard of them. Even after the battle in the world of C, Shaimuna, who had completely submitted to Euphemia Libertania, the new empress, had learned some secrets about Princess Mariana from Rei Minkai. For example, they wanted to use some kind of secret technology to improve the adaptability of GESS. Of course, this project had little to do with cloning, but the genetic technology involved was inextricably linked to cloning technology. Shaimuna, who understood everything from the memories of death recall, was eager to return to the imperial capital and personally tell the truth to Euphemia. However, how many times had it been? From Divine Wood Island to the endless ocean, from the ocean to the coast, from the coast to the mountains, from the mountains to the underground river. The only thing Shaimuna could do was to use prophecies again and again to guide her brother to drive Najid out of the enemy's encirclement and head towards the imperial capital. In these countless prophecies, Shaimuna's spirit, body, and even soul had reached a limit that could not be ignored. Even with the special glass cabin to alleviate the negative effects of Shaimuna's prophecies, the limit was still the limit. Her breathing became rapid. Her face became paler. The sweat on her forehead had already slid down her face. How far is it? Sheriel. When her trembling right hand habitually touched the hidden compartment where the pistol was stored, Shaimuna seemed to see the scene on the screen in front of Sheriel. The blurry city in the distance seemed to be the Britannia Empire's imperial capital, Pandora. Right? Soon, sister. Sheriel, who was focused on the situation around him, responded to his sister's question, but did not notice that his sister had raised the pistol again. Is that so? Then, let's meet again next time. My brother. I promise that this is the last time. The ear-piercing sound of the radar alarm. In front of him was Sheriel's abrupt change in expression, as well as the sudden appearance of enemies in the surroundings. Shaimuna knew that this was another death recall. It would also be the last time he would be able to use reverse death. Otherwise, Shaimuna would forever linger in the gray border between life and death, never to be reincarnated. Woo 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 woo. The ear-piercing alarm sounded in the sky above the Royal Guard Knight Regiment's encampment. Rei Minkai, who was dealing with documents, suddenly raised his head. Through the window, he looked at the Royal Guard Knight Regiment that was quickly gathering below. Tap tap. A hurried knocking sound came from the door. Veretta's nervous face appeared behind the door. Your Highness, it's an enemy attack. The Imperial Capital's radar detected a few unidentified KMFs approaching the Imperial Capital. Unidentified? Rei Minkai's gaze changed. He looked at the white cat, State 0, lying on the side of the office desk. Compared to the Imperial Capital's radar monitoring, Rei Minkai trusted the white cat's perception more. After all, the mastermind behind the scenes in the Imperial Capital had not appeared yet. It's the princess and her brother who are constantly hovering between life and death. White Cat State 0 raised its head slightly. After looking in a certain direction for a while, it gave a more accurate answer. The enemies chasing after them are a little familiar. Familiar? Are they people we have seen before? Rei Minkai asked, but White Cat State 0 shook its head. The distance is a little far, and the other party seems to be deliberately hiding their identity. Is that so? It seems that the guests are not here with good intentions. Rei Minkai stood up and sneered. Seeing this, Veretta said in surprise, Your Highness, are you going to attack? Of course. There is only one person who is known as the princess who was hovering between life and death by White Cat State 0. That was Shaimuna, who had the death reversal GSS. An enemy who could force such an overpowered geas near the imperial capital and relentlessly pursue, it was probably not an enemy that others could deal with. Otherwise, With the help of her geas and her brother who had a sister complex, Shyamna could easily deal with most of the situations. This was also the reason why Euphemia appointed the siblings to investigate the ruins scattered in every corner of the world. Now, the siblings who were forced to run back to the imperial capital had probably experienced an unimaginable crisis, or even death. Are we not waiting anymore? White Cat State Zero jumped on Raymond Kai's shoulder and asked casually, "Do we still need to wait now?" The reason why UFFI has been holding back is to wait for the siblings to return. Euphemia, who had the power of code, was very clear about the hidden dangers lurking in the shadows of the Empire. Therefore, in order to prevent the hidden dangers in the shadows of the Empire from affecting the new Empire, Euphemia was not willing to use the power of code to give the power of Geas to her trusted subordinates. For Euphemia, who had personally entered the world of sea and witnessed the battle between Ray Minkai and Charles in the Land of Gods, the power of Geas was undoubtedly powerful, but there were risks that could not be controlled. Humans were unable to control power that exceeded their own. The consequence of forcefully controlling power that exceeded one's own was bound to backfire on oneself, and one's body would be smashed to pieces. Therefore, before the traces of Geas and the Church in this world could be understood, code and Geas must be sealed by Euphemia. Veretta, issue an air raid warning. Also, inform His Majesty to take refuge. Before stepping out of the room, Ray Minkai glanced at the direction of the palace and ordered Veretta, "Yes, Your Highness." The instant the air raid warning sounded in the sky above the imperial capital, the nobles and the commoners all had the same reaction. Everyone who had experienced Macross's arrival in the imperial capital knew that the moment the air raid warning sounded, the only thing they could do was to enter the air defense facilities as quickly as possible and wait for the announcement of the end of the air raid. In the palace, Euphemia, who was wearing a white dress, ignored the dissuasion of the maids and stood motionlessly in the back garden, looking in the direction where the siblings appeared. "Your Majesty, please immediately back down. You don't have to worry about His Majesty's safety." Cornelia berated and ordered the panicked maids to back down. She then looked at the two girls standing beside Euphemia. They were Veretta and Lax Klein. "Veretta, can you see the situation over there?" Euphemia turned around and asked Veretta. The latter did not answer Euphemia's question. Instead, her figure swayed and another figure appeared. It was a beautiful figure with a beautiful gem in between her eyebrows, long pointed ears, and long flowing hair. It was a beautiful figure like a goddess. She was the existence that shared the same body as Veretta, Sharon. It's the siblings, Shalio and Shalio. They are now being pursued by unknown enemies. Sharon's voice was melodious and penetrating. It sounded like a sigh, but also like a song. Pursuit? It must have been hard on them. This is what the Empire owes them. Upon hearing this, Euphemia sighed and then looked in another direction. Sharon knew the direction in which Euphemia was looking, or rather, she knew who Euphemia was looking at. Kai is already attacked. Just as Sharon finished speaking, a crimson stream of light soared into the sky from the other side of the imperial capital and rushed towards the Shalio siblings. Raging Flame's demonic sword. Euphemia was very familiar with this crimson stream of light. It was one of the symbols of Rei Mingkai's status as a prince of the empire. It was a cutting-edge mech that was designed by combining the technology of two worlds. Is that Kai? Looks like Your Majesty's wait has finally paid off. Lax's gaze followed the crimson stream of light for a few seconds before she turned around and looked at Euphemia with a smile. That's true. This is all thanks to Kai and Lady Lax. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had such a great opportunity to let those people wantonly expand in places that the Empire cannot see. Is that so? Looks like Kai's and my misfortune isn't a bad thing after all. Isn't that so? After a few words, the two ladies looked at each other and smiled. Cornelia saw this and sighed in her heart. You may leave first. Since His Highness the Prince has already attacked, you don't have to be so flustered. The imperial capital still has the personal knight regiment. Seeing this, the maids silently retreated. The moment the crimson stream of light soared into the sky, the Lionheart Knight Regiment stationed in the Royal Guard Knight Regiment were like ferocious beasts that had been released from their cages. They followed the Empire's main roads and rapidly charged towards the Empire's vital regions. With lightning speed, they set up an impenetrable defense net in the Imperial capital. At the same time, under the cover of the Royal Guard Knight Regiment that had been released from their cages, the former Q Department, which was now the Empire's forces in the shadows, also came out in full force. As the crimson stream of light fought against the enemy alone, the giant net that Euphemia had set up above the Imperial capital finally fell. Chapter 785. The flames from the 20mm autocannon swept across the sky and sealed off all of Najid's escape routes. I try my best. Even though Kaleo gave it his all and used every method he could think of, he was finally stopped by the enemy at the edge of the Imperial capital and was unable to take another step forward. The shield on Najid's shoulders was already shattered, and one of the sharp swords in his hand was also broken. Only the broken sword in his right hand that had lost most of its lethality was left. Sister, looks like this is our limit. Kaleo smiled wryly. While dealing with the enemy's siege, he muttered to himself. Unexpectedly, Shyamna, who was supposed to be meditating, responded. Kaleo, hold on. Sister, you got another prophecy? Amidst the gunfire, Kaleo's expression was pleasantly surprised. The prophecy this time might be different, because this was the prophecy he got at the edge of the Imperial capital. Yes, the prophecy, the lion is coming to save us. Kaleo, that was the prophecy that had been reincarnated more than a few times. For the first time, Shaleo piloted Najid and risked his life to attack the sky above the Imperial capital. Under the cover of many Lionheart Knights, the siblings who had been chased across half of the earth finally landed safely in the Imperial capital. However, before Shyamna and her brother could meet with Euphemia and the others, a violent explosion instantly engulfed Najid. Kaleo died on the spot. Shyamna's legs were blown off, and she died from blood loss. The second time, after the tragic experience of the first time, Shyamna made arrangements in advance and avoided the fatal attack. However, the siblings still didn't meet with Euphemia and the others. That was because the moment she left Najid, Shyamna, who had wandered around the Death Rewind countless times, was finally in a weak and powerless state. She could only stand on the ground of the Imperial capital with the help of her brother Kaleo. However, at that moment, a bullet came out of nowhere and killed Shyamna. The third time, after being engulfed by the explosion and the pain of being pierced by the bullet, Shyamna became cautious and fearful. That was because she knew that even in the Imperial capital, which was regarded by the siblings as their savior, there were still fatal dangers lurking, waiting for them to appear. The corresponding countermeasures were constantly adjusted. Once again, the moment Najid finally stepped into the sky above the Imperial capital under the pursuit of the enemy, a red figure suddenly appeared in the sky above the Imperial capital. At this moment, Shyamna, who was wandering between life and death, finally saw the lion. The primordial lion that was burning with red lotus flames swept across the sky like a demon god descending from the heavens. Just like in C's world, the scene that Shyamna witnessed with her own eyes reappeared. Roar! The lion roared, and Shyamna's soul trembled. She fell from the boundary between life and death, from the endless backtracking of death, until she fell back to reality. His heavy body, the pain of being torn apart, it allowed Shyamna to clearly sense the existence of the real world, and also allowed her to see the screen in front of Shilyu. Huge wings of light. Then, the flame-like body blocked in front of Najid Thumel, blocking all of the enemy's attacks. Sharmna, Sheriel, thank you for your hard work. Now leave this to me. Your Highness, please be careful. There are still traces of enemies in the capital. A familiar voice, a familiar face. When it appeared in front of Shyamna, who had been through countless life and death situations, Shyamuna suddenly felt the world spinning. The moment she returned to reality, she hurriedly left a warning and lost consciousness. Big sister, Sheriel, who was full of joy, looked back and called out repeatedly. If he was not still piloting Najid, he would have already pounced to Shyamuna's side. King Sheriel, land in the palace. Someone will come to pick you up. Although Ray Minkai did not see Shyamuna's coma, the White Cat State Zero had already sensed it. Yes. Then, Your Highness, I'll leave this to you. Sheriel, who was worried about Shyamuna's situation, did not say anything else. Even if he retreated at the last minute, it was still his family's tradition of valuing war. Najid landed. The enemies who were chasing after him also tried to stop Najid, but they were stopped by the crimson figure in the sky with a single sword strike. Buzz. The moment the blade struck and cut the black cloak of the enemy that was chasing Najid, the rest of the enemy gave up on chasing Najid at the same time and surrounded the red figure in a circular formation. Ray Minkai, Empire's Knight Captain. The next moment, a steady and powerful middle-aged man's voice came from the four bodies covered in black cloaks. Although Princess Euphemia has the qualifications to become an emperor, the problem of choosing a lifetime partner is so laughable. A familiar voice. Mocking words. Ray Minkai narrowed his eyes slightly. Ah, yes. He recognized the owner of this voice. The number one knight of the Round Table of the Britannia Empire. The man who stood at the peak of all the knights of the Empire, Bismarck Waldstein. The Knight of the Round Table led by him. After Euphemia ascended the throne with the help of the powerful force from the City of Stars, the Knight of the Round Table, who was the pillar of the Empire, did not show any signs of resistance. He even remained silent about the words and policies that Euphemia had announced before and after her ascension. The silence of the Knight of the Round Table led many nobles, once made them think that the loyalty of the Knight of the Round Table was not to the 98th Britannia Emperor, Charles di Britannia, but to the entire Britannia Empire as a whole. Bismarck Waldstein, huh? Ray Minkai did not get angry but laughed. The red mech he was piloting raised the blade in its hand and pointed at the mech of the enemy, the one from which Bismarck Waldstein's voice came. I didn't expect the number one knight of the Britannia Empire to be a coward who doesn't dare to show his true body. This is really an eye-opener for me. Oomph. Have you seen through me? But this is inevitable. Bismarck Waldstein snorted coldly. He did not avoid the fact that his identity was seen through by Ray Minkai. Instead, he openly admitted it. Indeed, this is not the doing of a knight. So show yourself, my companions, to recreate the glory of Britannia. Now is the moment for us, the Knight of the Round Table, to sacrifice ourselves. The moment Bismarck Waldstein made a loud declaration, the four mech surrounding the red sword of raging flames suddenly tore the black cloaks on their bodies, revealing their true bodies hidden under the cloaks. Galahad, Talistan, Bedivere, Gahoris. When the black cloaks were torn apart, Ray Minkai also recognized the true names of the four mechs that were chasing Najid. A terrifying lineup of four knights of the Round Table that stood at the top of the knights of the Empire chasing a young king from a small country in the Middle East could be said to be extremely luxurious. I remember that His Majesty has never issued an order for the Knight of the Round Table to act. Oomph. His Majesty? His Majesty that we, the Knight of the Round Table, are loyal to is not the traitor who now occupies the throne. It is the 98th Emperor Charles di Britannia. Galahad pulled out the greatsword that the former emperor named the king's sword and pointed it at the sword of raging flames. Bismarck Waldstein's voice, with a hint of mockery, sounded again. Knight Ray Minkai, surrender. Your battle strength is known to the world. As long as you are willing to submit to the 98th Emperor Charles di Britannia again, there will be a Knight of the Round Table for you. At this moment, Ray Minkai laughed. Ha 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 ha, Knight of the Round Table. Perhaps this promise had an irresistible temptation before Ray Minkai's memory was awakened. But now, this promise had become so ridiculous. Bismarck Waldstein, It seems that your majesty didn't tell you much at all. Speaking of this, Rei Mingkai's tone changed. Oh yes, the person who killed the 98th Emperor Charles di Britannia was not Euphemia Britannia, but me, Rei Mingkai. What? The moment Rei Mingkai did not hesitate to disclose the truth, the Knight of the Round Table was shocked. My Majesty, you killed him with your own hands? What a joke! How could His Majesty, who was protected by Madame Mariana, be killed by a nobody like you? The first knight couldn't accept the truth told by Rei Mingkai. In his memory, Charles di Britannia, who had been missing for a long time, finally appeared in front of him, told the reason for his disappearance, and gave the order to purge the imperial court. The facts were true. Such a real experience. Could it be done by the dead person that Rei Mingkai said could do it? Knight of the Round Table. Attack. This person is just a person who misleads people with lies. For the Britannia Empire. The Knight of the Round Table shouted, and Galahad took the lead to wave the king's sword in his hand and rushed to the raging flame demon sword. Rei Mingkai. This is the king's sword named by His Majesty. Remember it from me. This will be the blade that will send you to the underworld. The big sword that was taller than Galahad slashed down at the raging flame demon, sword like Mount Tai. At the same time, Bismarck Waldstein's self-sealed left, I was released and activated the geas he held. I didn't expect that this power would be used on someone other than Mariana. Knight, you should be proud of this. That was the power to see through the future. It was also the fundamental reason why Bismarck Waldstein stood at the top of the Knight of the Round Table. In order to kill Rei Mingkai with one blow, the number one knight did not hesitate to use the power to see through the future to ensure that moment would come. However, facing Galahad's slash, the raging flame demon sword did not move at all and did not have the slightest intention of evading. Are you afraid? Humph. It seems that I overestimated. Buzz. The moment Bismarck Waldstein's confident and mocking smile had not yet spread out, the light wings of the raging flame demon sword changed color, and a layer of faintly discernible glimmer easily blocked the king's sword in the blink of an eye. Lambda drive system activated. Mental stability value normal. Output power normal. Kai, let's do it. The right hand of the raging flame demon sword passed through the glimmer and held the king's sword, and Rei Mingkai's response sounded. A decadent person who is intoxicated by the past. Times have changed. The right hand of the raging flame demon sword closed, and the king's sword broke. Chapter 786. The King's Sword. This was the highest honor that the Knight of the Round Table deserved since the Blood Code of Arms Rebellion. As the only one who did not participate in the rebellion, and instead defended the city gate under the siege of the rebels until the end of the rebellion. This blade, which was named the King's Sword by the 98th Emperor Charles di Britannia himself, became synonymous with Bismarck Waldstein. However, it was this King's Sword that symbolized the name of the first knight of the Britannia Empire. However, it was broken by Bismarck Waldstein and the other traditional nobles who saw it as a rising star who only relied on Euphemia Britannia as the new empress to climb to the top of the empire's power. The blade that had once slain countless enemies of the empire, the 98th Emperor Charles di Britannia, was easily crushed in the hands of the fiery demon sword. It was so sudden that even the geas used by Bismarck Waldstein couldn't see it. How is it possible? The king's sword was broken. The first knight's expression was one of astonishment as he watched the broken blade slip from the raging flame demon sword's hand and fall to the ground. But the instinct of experiencing life and death on the battlefield made the first knight quickly pull away from the flaming demon sword at this moment. At the same time, the Knight of the Round Table circling around also launched an attack to cover Grodd's retreat. In the shimmering barrier, the flaming demon sword didn't care about the attacks from the surroundings at all. The powerful defensive ability brought by the activated Lambda drive system was enough to make the flaming demon sword invincible. Perhaps Rei Mingkai should be glad that Mordred, who had a powerful energy attack weapon, didn't appear here. However, it was inevitable that there would be a different sound. If he wanted to pursue Najid Thomel, who had high mobility, Mordred, who had powerful firepower but relatively poor mobility, was not a good choice to pursue the enemy. Therefore, among the enemies in front of him, in addition to Grahad, driven by the first knight, Ray Minkai paid attention to Taristan, who had the ability to transform, high mobility, and some energy weapons. After all, the defensive force field of the Lambda Drive system could not provide comprehensive protection. The advantage in front of them was only based on the Knights of the Round Table's lack of understanding of the Lambda Drive system. With the advantage of information asymmetry, Ray Minkai decisively took the next step. Target Tori. As the wings of light flapped, the figure of the Inferno demon sword that had forced Jerahad to retreat flashed. It broke free from the encirclement of Bedivere and Gaholis and charged towards Toristan like lightning. It was fine if he didn't make a move, but once he did, it was like a thunderbolt. Third Knight Kino, I have a good impression of you, but now please die. Raising the raging flame demon sword in his right hand, he aimed it at Toristan. Seeing this scene, the third knight, Gino Bienbrook, who was piloting the Toristan, could not react at all. He could only watch the white light rising from the palm of the roaring flame demon sword. Buzz! Boom! The air compressed to the extreme by the Lambda Drive system exploded in an instant. The terrifying impact was like a 10,000-ton hammer, instantly smashing Toristan into pieces. There was no possibility of escaping from that terrible impact. The shattered Toristan shattered into thousands of pieces and scattered down from the sky. In just an instant, the young knight of the Round Table of the Britannia Empire, the third knight of the Knight of the Round Table, Gino Bienbrook, and his plane were unexpectedly killed in such a way that people were caught off guard. That amazing scene not only stunned Bedivere and Gaholis, but also shocked the first knight. Without using a gun, a sword, or an energy weapon, just by raising his palm, and Toristan was smashed. Looking at the scattered fragments of Toristan, the first knight's mood was shocked and complicated. At this moment, Bismarck recalled what Lei Minkai had said when the raging flame demon sword had broken the king's sword. Times have changed. No, this is just the self-defense of a rebellious usurper. We, the Knight of the Round Table, will defend the glory of Emperor Charles even if we fight to the last man. The first knight's mind became firm, and he was no longer shocked by the terrifying power displayed by the raging flame demon sword. There was only the supreme glory of defending Emperor Charles to the death. Pedantic and stupid, the raging flame demon sword turned around and faced Galahad, who raised the king's sword and was ready to attack again. It is because of the existence of pedantic and stupid people like you that the Empire can't move forward with all its strength. Ray Minkai's mocking voice resounded through the sky. So, please die for the future of the Empire. The figure of the raging flame demon sword disappeared. Whether it was Galahad, Bedivere, or Gaholis' airborne radar, they couldn't catch its trace. There was only the whine of the constantly moving but unable to lock onto the target of the Knight of the Round Table. In the sky, the light wings spread out by the raging flame demon sword were like streams of light, interweaving into a huge net that enveloped the rebellious Knight of the Round Table, completely blocking the retreat of the Knight of the Round Table. Do you want to catch us all in one fell swoop? You're too arrogant. Ray Minkai, the first knight, saw the action of the raging flame demon sword at a glance. In his view, even if Galahad's kingsword was broken, it would be impossible for him to easily defeat the Knight of the Round Table led by him. Is that so? In the sky, the moment Ray Minkai's response came, the figure of the raging flame demon sword suddenly appeared behind Bedivere. He raised his palm, and a white light burst out. It was the terrible brilliance that had shattered Talistan before. Rumble. This time, due to the attack of the raging flame demon sword that had far more mobility than their own, the Knight of the Round Table had to shrink their formation a little. This also made the first knight and the 12th knight who was piloting Gaholis personally feel the terrible attack from the raging flame demon sword. The sudden attack instantly destroyed Bedivere, and at the same time, it set off a storm that was enough to blow Galahad and Gaholes into a whirlwind. The two Knights of the Round Table, who were forced to use all their strength to stabilize their bodies, looked in horror at the raging flame demon sword that stood in the middle of the storm and was not affected by the storm at all, staring at them. Is it a monster? Bismarck Waldstein's left, I kept bursting out bursts of purple light, trying his best to see through the actions of the raging flame demon sword from the long river of time, but he could not see through the slightest movement. Then what's going on with that power? Geas, who had the ability to see through the future, only saw the raging flame demon sword that kept raising its hand and putting it down again. The power that easily broke the nightmare machine used by the Knight of the Round Table could not be captured by Bismarck Waldstein's Geas? How is this possible? Are you surprised? The first night. In the storm, Rayming Kai's voice sounded like rolling thunder. If the power of Geas originates from the power of the human mind, then the power of my raging flame demon sword also originates from the power of the human mind. The mind will not be bound by time and space. So, your Geas will not see through the attack of the raging flame demon sword. Arrogant. Faced with the reversal of the situation in an instant, there was only one path left in front of Bismarck. That was to fight with all his strength, regardless of life or death. Galahad's broken sword of the king broke through the wind and suddenly slashed at the raging flame demon sword. On the other side, Gaholes, piloted by the 12th Knight, Monica, followed closely and shot a hook at the right rear side of the raging flame demon sword. At the same time, she raised the long sword in her hand and went straight for the back of the raging flame demon sword. This attack was a perfect combination. It was a fatal blow launched with the excellent cooperation of the Knight of the Round Table. However, as mentioned before, when faced with the lambda drive system from another time and space, no matter how outstanding the combat power of the Knight of the Round Table was, they still ended up like the mithril mech pilots who faced the lambda drive system for the first time. Two shimmering barriers blocked Galahad's slash and Gaholes' stab. Ray Minkai whispered the news that frightened the two Knight of the Round Table. Right? I forgot to tell the two of you. This battle has already been arranged for a global broadcast. In other words, Her Majesty Euphemia has already expected the betrayal of the Knight of the Round Table and has been prepared for it. What? Bismarck was stunned and suddenly shouted. Monica, retreat. We have been tricked. Galahad and Gaholes quickly retreated and raised the raging flame demon sword with both hands again. Since you're here, stay. Let the world see how vulnerable the so-called Knight of the Round Table is. In an instant, the terrible light that instantly obliterated the two Knight of the Round Table appeared again and pointed directly at Galahad and Gaholes, who were retreating quickly. Looking at the brighter and more terrifying white light, Bismarck frantically urged his GSS, try to find a glimmer of hope in the long river of time. But the 12th Knight, Monica, was not as lucky as him. Without the help of GSS, the 12th Knight could only rely on her own driving skills and functions. Even if she tried her best, she could only be obliterated by the Lambda Drive system's fatal attack. Boom! Steel wreckage scattered in the sky again, as well as pieces of bloody clothes. It would be a tragic scene, and it would also be the horn that heralded the withdrawal of the Knight of the Round Table from the stage of history since the 98th Emperor Charles. Cold sweat dripped down. The roots of his teeth had long been bitten to the point of bleeding. The purple light in Bismarck's left eye burst out with the brightest light in his life, and even his right eye began to shine with the same light. It was to get a chance to escape from the Lambda Drive system of the raging flame demon sword. However, from the moment he gathered all the Knight of the Round Table and launched a rebellion, his ending had already been drawn to the end of the long river of fate. Boom! The white light in the raging flame demon sword was like a meteor in the daytime, directly bombarding Galahad's body. Bismarck, who broke through his own limit, obtained a more powerful GSS and saw the future further, suddenly laughed out loud. Ha ha! I see. We have really been abandoned by the times. In the laughter, the Empire's first knight, Bismarck Waldstein, and his pilot, Galahad, were killed on the spot by the raging flame demon's sword. This scene, as Ray Minkai said, was broadcast to all parts of the world by the satellites in the Britannia Empire's orbit. Chapter 787. The light of the defeat of the Knight of the Round Table flickered in the sky. In the palace below, a group of maids were surrounding a young girl in a wheelchair, using themselves as the last barrier to protect the noble young girl who couldn't move on her own. Lord Anya Alstrom, what are you doing? This is the palace. Even if you're the sixth knight, you can't be so presumptuous. As the head maid in charge of taking care of the young girl, the middle-aged woman who stood in front of the maids and acted as the first barrier sternly reprimanded the pink young girl who knocked down a group of skilled palace guards. The sixth knight, Anya Alstrom, who had the same hair color as the current Empress Euphemia, but had her hair tied up, was no longer as taciturn as before. Instead, a pressure that was enough to make the maids tremble in fear spread out from her body and hovered above the room. Presumptuous? The right hand of Anya Alstrom flickered with a burst of light. Taking a closer look, it turned out to be a small but sharp knife that could easily slit the throat. What a joke. This is my home. What do I want to do? Do I need someone else's approval? The sixth knight sneered, then raised her right foot and kicked away the soldier in front of her. Step by step, she approached the maids. No, the young girl who was protected by the maids. I thought you had already left this world, but I never expected that you would still come back. This is really touching, isn't it? Nanalie. Your Highness Nanalie, quickly leave this place. You. Quickly take Her Highness Nanalie away. When the head maid saw Anya Alstrom approach, she immediately picked up the spear that had fallen in front of her and held it horizontally in front of her chest, showing a resolute expression of vowing to stop Anya Alstrom. Even the sixth knight can't make us take half a step back. The head maid's resolute expression inspired the maids behind her. Some of them also picked up the spear and chose to stand with the head maid, while others formed groups of 2 or 3 and surrounded Nanalie, quickly pushing the wheelchair and retreating outside. TSK. Troublesome. Then don't blame me for being impolite. At the end of the day, you people are nothing but slaves of the Britannia royal family. Anya Alstrom didn't care about the maidservant's obstruction. She just didn't want to show off too much in front of Nanalie and ruin her image in Nunalie's memory. That was why she didn't make these maidservants lose their ability to react like the palace guards who had collapsed on the ground. Bang! The knife in Anya Alstrom's hand drew a cold arc, dodging the head maid's spear and going straight for her white throat. This strike was a sure kill strike. This was because when she was stopped by the head maid, Anya Alstrom discovered that the battle in the sky had come to an end. The Knight of the Round Table had lost. He knew that if he continued to delay, he would be surrounded by reinforcements, let alone take Nunnalie away. Thus, killing him became the only choice. Buzz. However, the knife that was so sharp that it could slit the throat with a light slash stopped when it touched the head maid's throat. Looking at the drop of blood that quickly trickled down the tip of the knife, Anya Alstrom smiled. This was because the target she was chasing had taken the initiative to come to her. Stop! Sixth Knight, no. Amidst the crisp sound, the slowly moving wheelchair appeared in front of Anya Alstrom as the maidservants made way for it. The girl who controlled the wheelchair forward was Nunnalie V. Britannia. At this moment, the girl was using her big bright eyes to look at the pink girl who was pressing the sharp knife against the head maid. Her eyes were unfamiliar, but there were also familiar fluctuations. Stop! There are no enemies here. My mother, Mariana V. Britannia. When Nunnalie softly revealed the true identity of the mastermind behind Anya Alstrom, the maidservants who tried to persuade Nunnalie to leave immediately exploded. Buzz! The instant the droplets of blood on the tip of the knife were flung onto the maid's white collar, the knife that had almost killed her was also put back into Anya Alstrom's sleeve. As expected of my daughter, Nunnalie, since you were young, I knew that your sixth sense was different from that of ordinary people. I didn't expect that you would still be able to see my existence under such circumstances. As she spoke, Anya Alström's eyes glowed with a purple light. It was the unique light when Geas was activated. However, this was not the light when Geas was used on others, but when the Geas hidden in Anya Alström's body was activated. It was a long time ago, during the so-called palace attack. Before Mariana, who was killed by V, died, she activated the Geas she possessed and lodged her soul in the body of the maid, Anya Alström, who happened to appear next to her. Your Highness, the head maid, who raised her hand to cover her slashed neck and resisted the fear of death, shouted hoarsely, but she was stopped by Nunnally. Head maid, step back. She won't hurt me. Nunnally saw it very clearly. As long as she showed even a trace of rebellion and was unwilling to listen to orders, the people here would probably be ruthlessly slaughtered by Anya Alström, who is actually her mother, Mariana. Yes, after all, this is the moment when I reunite with my beloved daughter. I don't want blood to ruin this moment. Isn't that right? Nunnally. Anya Alström smiled, then took a few steps forward and stood in front of Nunnally. Come, Nunnally, come with me. Where to? Anya Alström didn't say, and Nunnally didn't ask. Whether it was her or Nunnally, they both knew that as long as they said their purpose, it would definitely be the time to break off. Mother, I'm very happy to see you again. But now, I can't go with you. You're not going with me? Nunnally's calm refusal made Anya Alström fly into a rage. She suddenly reached out to grab Nunnally. Just as she was trying to forcefully take Nunnally away, a shocking change suddenly occurred. It was as if there was an invisible wall between her and Nunnally, causing her right hand to be unable to touch Nunnally, let alone take her away. The moment she continuously increased her strength in an attempt to break through the invisible wall, Anya Alström suddenly discovered something strange among the maids. Who is it? Come out. Who is obstructing me? The maids silently retreated, allowing the figure they were covering to appear in front of Anya Alström. Nice to meet you. It's a great honor to meet Princess Mariana. I'm Layla Marikar. On the orders of Empress Euphemia, I'm here to welcome Princess Nunnally and take refuge. Under the long blonde hair was an exquisite face. Under the contrast of a luxurious court dress, this girl who called herself Layla Marikar was simply a noble princess born in the royal family. But that wasn't important. What was important was Layla Marikar's eyes. That pair of eyes was also flickering with the light of GASS, but there was something different about them. For some reason, the moment Anya Alström saw those eyes, she subconsciously took half a step back. It was as if the appearance of those eyes made her see her natural enemy. She was controlled by the fear that originated from the depths of her genes and instinctively chose to retreat. No, this pair of eyes can't appear in this world. That's the Geas that CC gave you? Your Highness, I've heard about your deeds since I was young. To me, when I was young, your existence was undoubtedly the glory that led us to our growth. Amidst the fear of Anya Alström, Layla slowly walked to Nunnally's side and gently patted Nunnally's shoulder to reassure her before looking at Anya Alström again. Your Highness, please forgive me for offending you. I learned from Her Majesty Empress Euphemia that Her Highness has already followed the former Emperor Charles di Britannia to heaven. Why are you still attached to this world and staying here? Shut up. Anya Alström, who was shocked by Layla's eyes that were shining with a strange light, shouted coldly and turned to look at Nunnally. Nunnally, today, I'm here to take you away. As long as you're willing to stand by our side, then this world will be as you wish. Not only Lucio v. Britannia, but also this empire will belong to you. However, Nunnally shook her head in the face of Anya Alström's promise. No, Mother, I've already heard about what happened from my brother. Therefore, I can't agree to Mother's request. Nunnally, a cold light flashed. Anya Alström wanted to forcefully take Nunnally away again. However, before she could rush up, Layla decisively activated the Geas she had. The sharp blade cut through the sky, but the moment it touched Layla's throat, it fell to the ground. Then, Layla opened her arms and caught the unconscious Anya Alström. Thank you for your hard work, Anya Alström. From now on, you will only be Anya Alström. Now have a good night's sleep. Viscount Layla. Mother, have you left? Nunnally asked with a complicated expression as she watched the maid scramble to take the unconscious Anya Alström from Layla's arms. This was not a reunion of family, as she had imagined. Moreover, when Nunnally and Lou Lucio reunited, Lou Lucio had once revealed the truth that their parents were dead. Although it was inconceivable that they would meet again like this, Lilina still accepted it calmly. The effect of Geas has been removed. In theory, Princess Mariana has indeed left Anya Alström's body. After a pause, Layla smiled softly. Perhaps His Majesty should know where Princess Mariana's true body is. That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.